Yeah. So in advance, sorry for the late start of our meeting of today. Your Excellencies, colleagues from African Diplomatic Corps, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the AGOA subcommittee, I extend my gratitude to the African Union representational mission here, to the United States of America for its leadership in convening this critical workshop and for its unwavering support to our shared advocacy for AGOA's renewal. Good morning. So this gathering on enhancing diplomatic advocacy comes at a most pivotal moment in the final decisive stretch of negotiation for the renewal or for the very least a temporary extension of AGOA, which is set to expire in just 35 days, so on September 30. So despite calls for its modernization to meet the ambitions of strengthening US-Africa economic partnership, let us to be unequivocal, AGOA remains the indispensable cornerstone of US-Africa trade relations. So, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, the potential lapse of AGOA is not an abstract concern. It is an immediate threat to millions of dollars in investment and hundreds of thousands of livelihoods across our continent. So consider the fact that in 2024, export to the US from AGOA eligible sub-Saharan Africa countries counted for $8 billion. AGOA is credited with creating 300,000 direct jobs in Africa and more than 1.3 million indirect jobs also. So the Department of Commerce, US Department of Commerce, reports that over 460,000 American jobs in retail, agriculture, logistics, and manufacturing are supported by two-way trade with Africa. So at this stage, it's important to have these 2 days conversation around AGOA and how are we going to move forward in terms of continuing to find the way to benefit from AGOA. You know that for the last few weeks, each countries were receiving the new reciprocal tariffs. So based on that, we need to move on how to reinstallment of the MFN tariffs over the 500 product line, and also for the GSP that we know that which expired without renewal. So the commercial diplomacy fundamentally depends on a framework of certainty, as long-term investment and supply chain planning are impossible without predictability. I was in Madagascar last week and having discussion, for example, with our private sector government member. So we were talking about renewal and also how to get, lastly, maybe the extension of deadline. And based on that, we were thinking of competitiveness also. I think part of that renewal of AGOA competitiveness discussion on Africa economy should be on the table also. So that's things that I would like to share with you. Since the AGOA deadline is approaching, it's like tomorrow, the deadline. So for those 2 days, let's have, let's say, the cohesive, powerful, and innovative strategy to engage with key stakeholders across the US administration and Congress. And that's why we are going to have very, let's say, large panelists during those 2 days, and let's hope for a productive and successful workshop. So I will leave the floor to distinguished panelists. I'm just here to make a welcome statement. So I would like to invite first Mr. Tarek Oussef, chargé d'affaires at African Union mission to the United States, to have his welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good morning, colleagues, brothers and sisters, Your Excellency, Ambassador Rakato Molala, Ambassador of the Republic of Madagascar, and our co-chair of the AGOA subcommittee, Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, Ambassador Christopher Kiriga, thank you for your support. I really appreciated working with you in this endeavor. So I want to recognize that at the outset. Professor Bob Wekesa, who is with us online, and he has been instrumental in putting in place with the mission this event. My dear brother, Professor Landry Signé, who needs no introduction, and our esteemed and distinguished panelists. Dear colleagues, on behalf of my colleagues here at the African Union Mission, I want to extend to each one of you a warm welcome to Africa House. And thank you for joining us this morning in last days of August. And I know how challenging is that. To discuss one of the critical issues in our agenda today, the AGOA renewal and US-Africa trade and investment relation from different lenses, as well as our diplomatic, advocacy, and engagement approach for hopefully an extension of AGOA. We have invited esteemed panelists for our discussion in a very short notice, and I want to recognize and thank them for their engagement and their support. My sister from the Chamber, Leard from CCA, Tony, and many of them who are coming during these 2 days. So thank you for your leadership. I look forward to have your framing of these critical issues and how we can amplify our advocacy effort. I think there is a policy window or a window of opportunity, as we say, that we need to seize collectively. I mean, member states, bilaterally, regionally, and continentally, to advocate for the renewal of AGOA. As you said, Your Excellency, AGOA remains the backbone of US-Africa trade and investment relationship. AGOA has yielded significant benefits for both the US and Africa, despite the fact that its full potential has not been tapped. No one denied that. Our objective is to come up with compelling argument for the extension of AGOA for these 2 days, particularly from an American first perspective. I think that will be very, very interesting for us to hear. So when Congress resumes its work after Labor Day. The main ideas and recommendations that will come from these 2 days workshop will be embedded and consolidated in one document that will be shared with all embassies. Without further ado, I want to thank all of you for your support, for your engagement, and over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for these welcome remarks. And now we are going to view online the remarks by Professor Bob Wekesa, Director of the African Center for Studies of the United States and University of Johannesburg in South Africa. So please make the video. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Rakoto Malala, for the invitation. And let me also just
the mics, because we cannot hear.
I have unmuted. I hope maybe it's not on my part. I'm unmute on this part. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
You can hear me now?
Perfectly. Thank you. Please go ahead. Thank you. Please go ahead.
No, thank you. I was just beginning by thanking Ambassador Rakotomalala for the invitation. I'm also like to thank and recognize my brother Chajedi Affairs, Tarek Ben Yusuf, for indeed opening up the AU mission in DC for to serve as a convening entity and a platform for this very, very important work. And of course, I'd also like to recognize my fellow scholar, Professor Landry Signe, and glad to reconnect again after quite some time without being in the same spaces. And of course, I do recognize all distinguished diplomats in attendance. And as we say, as Africans, all protocols observed. I'll just make a few remarks and then, hand over. And it's essentially to say that, of course, we know that the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which we better know as AGOA, expires on September 30th, as we know. So essentially, we are preparing for either something completely new, something that is modified, a different kind of framework, or as some in the new spaces have kind of intimated, the lapse with no renewal of AGOA. These are very stark options for the African continent, for African countries and African people. My colleagues, of course, Ambassador Rakotomalala and Chajedi Affairs Ben Yusuf have pointed out the importance of AGOA. Nobody can actually question that. So I think these are very stark moments when we have to think very fast and think very strategically. And this is why I was very glad to be involved in the crafting and shaping and framing of this advocacy workshop. Because along those three options that are pointed out, we have to try to avert the possibility of the expiry or lapse of AGOA without renewal. Which of course some have said is the likelihood. And if we are going to have a modified form of AGOA, then we need advocacy lobbying skills to ensure that actually the modification works in the interest of the African continent. Or if a totally new trade framework will emerge, again, we have to have our input. So along these three options, we should treat, I think, the uncertainties not only as challenges, but as opportunities. That's the initiation of this advocacy diplomacy workshop around African and US interests and priorities. It is important that we seize the moment, as earlier stated by Chajedi Affairs, to see how best we can think strategically, to have inputs along a number of questions. Over the next 2 days, I suppose some of the key issues that we'll have to deal with include what is AGOA and what are its key aspects. I think sometimes we assume we know, but this is a moment when we are called upon to deepen our knowledge and understanding as a prerequisite or as a starting point towards negotiations. In fact, where I sit, I'm just wondering to myself, have the negotiations even begun? What form are the negotiations taking? With whom are the negotiations being undertaken? And I think a clear understanding of these very basic fundamental questions is important. And then, of course, we need to understand what the key African and US strategies interests are and how they are aligned or misaligned. I think these days we hear a lot about the America First policy and the changed foreign policy environment in Washington, DC and all over the US. And of course, we've seen some of those effects beginning to be felt, not just in Africa, but globally. Of course, then, who are the key stakeholders? And again, sometimes I think we assume we know in the executive branch of government, in the legislative arm, amongst other stakeholders who are non-state actors, private sector, the media and communication platforms, the think tanks, and so forth, who are our allies, whom we can actually work with in setting agendas, in framing issues in our interest. And of course, the clearest interest is the renewal of AGOA, or at least some extension. And in fact, we also need to also be very strategic and clear-minded in understanding what the implications will be in a shifting global order, and if this has any impact in negotiating in DC for the renewal of AGOA. I think I could go on and on the reasons as to why we need this workshop, and that the workshop will then be instrumental in the negotiation process. But suffices to say, this workshop has three objectives. One is to develop a clear understanding of the current status of AGOA in the new trade landscape in Washington, DC, and learn about the best strategies for approaching the right audiences with the right messages regarding the renewal process. The second objective is to reinforce the advocacy capacities of African diplomats and all of us, with the objective of a results-oriented engagement rather than just advocacy for advocacy's sake. And lastly, we want to employ these strategies in the communication platforms. Which communication tools do we use? How do we frame the issues that are emerging, whether those that are anti-African or pro-African? How do we set the agendas? This will be a key objective, because then it will help us with the negotiation process, both direct and indirect approaches. The immediate outcome of this workshop will be a rapid response report, indeed a report capturing the key discussion points that then lead us into negotiations. We are also going to develop a toolkit to assist with the next steps, so that we are working in unison, but we also understand what the negotiation processes are, so that we don't miss opportunities or take some of the opportunities for granted. And lastly, we'll have recommendations, and all these immediate outcomes will be available in a week's time, working together. Fellow colleagues, ambassadors, diplomats, I would like to stop there, because I'm certain you are very keen to listen to the panelists that will be coming next. And so back to you, moderator, Ambassador Rakoto Malala.
Thank you so much, Professor Wakeza, for your remarks. What we can catch from that is the importance, again, of engaging with key stakeholders regarding renewal or extension of deadline of AGOA. So during the next 2 days, we are going to come up with those outcomes on how to, let's say, to target the right audiences on that. So thank you so much, Professor Wakeza, again, for drawing the context where we are today and where we're going to be in the next 35 days. So based on that, we are also going to welcome Professor Landry Signé, that we all know for his work in shaping the future of US-Africa trade and investment in the new global era. We are really impatient to hear you and to know also what's the future of this US-Africa trade in the context actually complex also. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Excellency Rakoto Malala, and it's my pleasure. Je suis très honoré de votre introduction, Excellency Chairperson. So, hello everyone. Oh no, that is not the African energy that we want on this so special day. Hello everyone. I love this. That is more aligned. So, Excellencies, distinguished ambassadors, members of the African Diplomatic Corps, and dear colleagues, I'm really honored to be here with you today, and I really want to acknowledge the African Union missions to the United States and the current leader of the mission, Tarek Ben Youssef, chargé d'affaires, as well as the entire team. So thank you so much for your leadership. You have been working for over a decade, and you are always at the forefront of key questions. And also my dear brother Bob Wekesa. So I was in South Africa for the launch of the African Center for the Study of the United States. So that is a wonderful initiative. So I commend you and the university also for this initiative. So, of course, you have heard about, we have already engaged multiple times, so I will not be speaking to you necessarily about the 4 Ps in US foreign policy or global affairs. Of course, power and geopolitical competition, although we may leverage them. Peace, which is the second P, and security or prosperity, which is the topic of today. Trade, investment, commercial relation, and economic expansion. And the final one, principle, which include global development and others. So I just mentioned them quickly, those 4 Ps: power, principle, peace, and prosperity, because overall, independently of what the administration will do or no, it is in convergence or as a trade-off or dissensus between those 4 Ps. So, but one thing what I want to emphasize now that I have not discussed extensively before is not the 4 Ps of global affairs or US foreign policy, but the 3 Ps of public policy in the policy making process. The 3 P or streams. The first one is the problem, the second, the policy, and the third, the politics. So, and perhaps I will just take and so I will further explain. So the problem, of course, today, the obvious problem is the renewal or extension of AGOA. The policy stream are the solution. Either it could be extended as such or with adjustment or temporarily or no. So we have many policy options. And then the biggest challenge is the politics, where you have, of course, the difference between the Congress, the president, and so on. And when those 3 Ps are aligned, we have what we call the window of opportunity to adopt a policy in the agenda. And those are really important. I just want to take an illustration. Many of the policy I was advocating, proposing in the Trump 1 administration, from day 1 to the end, I was sharing those ideas, and many people were saying, aren't you getting tired of not having some of your options adopted? And suddenly, when Biden was elected, President Biden was elected, the National Security and the National Intelligence Council reached out to draft a report, and when the new policy was adopted, about 75% of the recommendation, which many were thinking, oh, aren't you tired of still pushing, were adopted. So it's about the politics. The only thing we changed was the politics. So do not miss an opportunity to have your idea adopted just because the context may not look like it is suitable. So you have to push until. So I think our brother from South Africa will. So the famous Nelson Mandela quote: "It always looks impossible until it is done." So I think that is one of the key dimensions. Now, having said some of those points, I want to bring a slightly analytical perspective. So using the scenario planning and strategic planning, and some scenario seems obvious that they will not be adopted, but it is still important because I think in planning, in strategizing, and having policy adopted, it's important to think holistically. And while you're doing so, I will also share about what specific actions could be adopted either by ambassadors or by trade or public affairs attaché, among other. So the first scenario, AGOA renewal and strengthening. Who think it is a likely scenario? Can you raise the hand? No one. Absolutely. So that scenario, I wrote it as not likely. So I will not spend a lot of time on the role of the ambassador and the various players, because just in the interest of time, but we can discuss this later. So the second scenario is AGOA renewal with restriction or delays. So which we think that this scenario might potentially happen. A few, amazing. So it's already a dimension. So until AGOA expire, although I'm the first one who think it is not necessarily likely, everything has to be done as if it is possible, because there's still a shot, especially with the current president, who doesn't necessarily care about acting in a, let me say, coherent way. He's pretty comfortable to say something today and his contrary tomorrow, and the contrary again the following day. So until it happens, until it is expired, anything is still possible. So I think in this, and perhaps just very briefly, it is important to engage, especially proactively, with the key policymaker, both in the Congress and in the White House, especially at the ambassadorial level, but also for economic trade and investment attaches, to really showcase the benefit of AGOA to the US and not necessarily to Africa. Quite often when we speak about the benefit of AGOA, we think about the benefit of AGOA for Africa, where we should be thinking about the benefit of AGOA for the US, because you are trying to persuade the US to advance African interest. So I will perhaps shift to another scenario. So that was the second scenario. The third scenario, AGOA expiration without immediate renewal. Who think this scenario is likely? Expiration by the end of September without immediate renewal by the end of September. Some. Okay, good. So this is a likely scenario, and I think it's extremely important in the policy-making process to take that into consideration as well, because the vigor of the action will depend. And for this scenario, the ambassador should really seek, when, if possible, to vigorously engage with the White House. Literally, the White House can change the fate of AGOA overnight, independently of what happened in the Congress, at least for an interim or short-term position. And so I think that is a key dimension to look for at the White House first, but also at the Congress, of course, because trade is one of the prerogatives of the Congress. Anything which may look like the Congress is not respected may, and the Congress is already in favor of, or at least was, or many members of the Congress are strong supporters of AGOA. It's a key dimension not to overlook. So that's one point. So, and of course, it's important for the public affairs attaché to really explore launching a strategic media campaign emphasizing the US benefit. I think most people do not know and understand the benefit of AGOA, especially when we read, except when we read African or some of the distinguished think tanker that we have here. And welcome, Excellency. So we appreciate. So unless we, so some of the distinguished led, for example, a Mount Order. So the benefit of AGOA are not always obvious for order. So we have to overemphasize, overflow. It may be even at the country level or the continental level. This is the responsibility of each country to really do that. And I think the media or press attaché and political or public affairs could really do this. So I really commend Madam Chairperson of this, your action also with the AGOA subcommittee, because this is really extremely important to really have that sort of task forces to speak with one voice. Speaking with one voice when engaging with the US doesn't mean not having also a bilateral engagement. It's okay, but when engaging bilaterally, it is extremely important to not to do so at the expense of the collective initiative. And I say this because when I engaged with many congressional members, they told me, hey, we have received X or Y country, and they were saying that we should not even be thinking about the FCFT or the African Union. I will not name anything, but I'm just saying that they observed that. So it's extremely, and that discredit the countries which are doing this more than he discredit the African Union or the other countries. So it's really important to first, of course, advance the interest. That is why countries sent you to represent them here. But on the other hand, always have a positive note for the African Union and for the collective position and for the key takeaways, which will be shared here after this session or workshop. So it's also really important, again, to engage with the US private sector and have strategic alliances and have them. I see CCA here, I see the Chamber, so they are incredible partner. They are strong advocate for those type of engagement, and many of your members as well. And I will not speak on your behalf. They are here and they will engage later. So and they will share your own perspective. But even with the Brookings institution, we rely and we count on them when we organize even for such engagement. So, and again, evidence-based policy making. I have many more notes. I will not go through all of them, so we'll have other opportunity to engage. I don't want the opening remark to last much longer. But what I want to say is you really have to be intentional and use strategic insight, foresight, also perspective, long-term view, and focus on the U.S. interests. Because ultimately, we are advancing our interests as African. But the best way to do so is not to speak about how our interests may be jeopardized, but it's to speak about how the U.S. interests are jeopardized by not, and they are actually jeopardized. Many corporations which I'm engaging, that uncertainty has an incredible high cost. So we have a unique opportunity here, as I was sharing the various scenarios. We have a unique opportunity here for scenario 3. So the scenario 2, so it's until the end, it still can happen. Scenario 3, even if AGOA expire, it is not done. It is not over. It could still be reinstated. So the work should continue because it is at that cost that our interest will be advanced on the long run. The final scenario, I will not expand on it because if this happens, I'm certain that the African Union will organize another session like this one, but it is the post-AGOA in case of no renewal. So I have also different specific recommendation for that. But this, we hope, just because we hope this is not what should happen, and just because we want to keep all the energy now to ensure that it is expanded and it is renewed, let's focus now on the achievement of either scenario 2 or 3, which seems to be the only option left possible to be achieved by the end of this month. And if they are not, let's organize another meeting and strategize about what should be done. So thank you so much for your precious attention.
Okay, so lots of energy. Thank you so much to Professor Signé. It's always a pleasure to listen to your analysis. As you know, we are 35 days lasting. So that's good to hear from your free-paced, let's say, approach to come up with, let's say, a matrix. Maybe at the end of the 2 days of gathering here, we can move on having a clear strategy based on the deadline and based also on the consequences for each economy. Mostly in terms of additional tariffs plus non-AGOA renewal, it's going to be catastrophic for everyone. So thank you so much. We took notes on your free scenario also. So let's wait for the true scenario that's going to be on the table. But I think engaging with Congress is going to be key. At this stage, also with private sector. Just for example, on the week of September 8, for Madagascar in perspective, we will have delegation coming here, ministerial and private sector, to continue to engage like we did on March with various private sector, CCA, Chamber of Commerce, all Capitol Hill, but I think it's part of the global one. Just a few words, because last 2 weeks there were the SADC summit in Madagascar. Madagascar handing over from Zimbabwe to head the SADC region. And part of that, there was a dialogue between USA and SADC. So it was very important because it's kind of platform that is now in place for region, SADC region, to engage with the US. So Deputy Assistant Secretary Melanie Higgins was in Madagascar holding that meeting with SADC region. So I just would like to let you know that there is this type of platform also that we can move on to advocacy, to continue to advocate on AGOA renewal. So for this first part of session, thank you again for your attention. And we are going to move to the second part, who is going to be the prospect of AGOA, very, let's say, important renewal and US-Africa trade and investment partnership to the new landscape. So it's going to be a very, very important session that we would like to invite on the here on the stage. Mrs. Kendra Gader, President of US-Africa Business Center, and Senior Vice President of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, my dear friend. Mr. Lard Traber, Director of Trade and Investment Programs, Corporate Council of Africa. Mr. Anthony Carroll, Non-Resident Scholar of Africa Program, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I would like to invite my colleague, Chimisang Mozoto, to take over on the moderator. Thank you so much.
And please give a round of applause to our distinguished chairperson of the panel.
Thank you.
Very good. Well done, Madam. The floor is yours. I'm going to run out the door afterwards. Okay, I mean, I'm not. We need another chair. Got that? Let's see. It's really wonderful. We need one more chair. We need one more chair. I got it right here. There we go. All set. That's why we need to
Anyway, it's fine by me.
How are you?
Yeah.
I was there last 2 weeks ago.
Will I need to use this?
Yes. Ready to help.
Courtesy of the dean, you know.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
We should try it. Could happen. Make it happen. It's a world-class video.
Okay, let's start. Good morning once more, Excellencies, distinguished panelists, colleagues and friends. This is a privilege for me to serve as your moderator for this session that goes to the very heart of Africa's economic future and its partnership with the US. As we gather here today, we do so against the backdrop of a rapidly changing global trade environment. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, which for the past 25 years has anchored our trade and investment partnership with the US, is approaching its expiration in just over a month, on September the 30th. Its renewal or lack thereof will carry profound implications not only for African economies, but also for American businesses that have built strong long-term partnerships on the certainty that AGOA has provided. This conversation could not be more timely. We are standing at a crossroads where decisions made in DC will shape the trajectory of US-Africa trade for the next several years. Yet equally, how we as African diplomats, policymakers, and private sector partners frame the arguments, present the data, and tell our collective story will be decisive in influencing the outcome. Today's session will allow us to take stock of the prospects for AGOA's renewal and to examine the wider US-Africa trade and investment partnership in the context of a new and shifting trade landscape. We have before us a distinguished panel, each bringing a unique vantage point. From the US business community, from institutions facilitating corporate engagement, and from policy and academic cycles shaping the debate in Washington. Together, they will help us unpack the political dynamics, economic opportunities, and strategic narratives that are shaping the conversation on AGOA in this city. Colleagues, our task is not simply to describe the challenges. It is to identify leverage points, opportunities, and strategies that ensure Africa's voice is not just heard, but acted upon. There's a moment to move beyond defensive advocacy to proactive vision setting, to articulate how a renewed AGOA can serve as a bridge to deeper trade, investment, and innovation ties. Now, allow me to introduce the panelists. On my right, we have Kendra. She's the president of the US Africa Business Center and senior vice president at the US Chamber of Commerce. She has been at the forefront of shaping African private sector engagement with Africa. She has been at the forefront of shaping American private sector engagement with Africa, providing a strong voice for business in advancing mutually beneficial trade and investment relationships. On my immediate left, I have late Director of Trade and Investment Programs at Corporate Council on Africa. He brings both policy and practical expertise in connecting African opportunities with US investment. And he has long been a key partner in facilitating dialogue between government and private sector. At the far right, we have my dear friend, Anthony, a non-resident scholar at the African Program of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. With decades of experience in trade, policy, and investment across Africa, he combines deep insights into the Washington policy environment with a rich understanding of Africa's economic landscape. Together, these panelists will help us assess the prospects of AGOA renewal, consider the challenges and opportunities it presents, and frame a pathway for stronger US-Africa economic ties. With that, allow me to invite our first speaker, Kendra, to begin sharing her perspective.
Thank you, Excellency. And good morning and good afternoon to Bob, but Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished leaders of the diplomatic corps, all protocols observed. It's my pleasure to be here with you this morning representing the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and our longstanding ongoing work to partner with you and your governments to strengthen the economic and commercial relationship between our nations. The theme that was presented to us was not just looking at the AGOA renewal, but looking towards the future. But I'd be remiss if we didn't start at the foundation and align myself with the themes that were highlighted by Professor Wakesa, Professor Sine, our distinguished hosts, in terms of the importance of AGOA reauthorization and not taking our foot off the gas, although there are 35 days left. There are many reasons to be skeptical about the potential for reauthorization to happen by September 30th. But I thought it was very diplomatically stated that there are non-traditional pathways to success with this administration, and I encourage creative thinking and how we all get to the outcome that we want. Again, let me just state at the outset that we have continued to push for AGOA's reauthorization, and we still think it a possibility that AGOA could be reauthorized during this period, but we are realistic and we recognize that some of that prospect is dimming. Part of that is just the plain congressional landscape, and I think we have to acknowledge with the time that's left and the different obligations before Congress, and regrettably, the very real prospect of a government shutdown that looms. It will be challenging to get congressional attention on something this impactful as AGOA reauthorization. But I would also note that it does make it challenging for the legislative vehicles that are up for consideration for a provision to be included to extend AGOA's validity. That is what we have been calling for at the Chamber. You've probably heard that there have been discussions around the potential to add a provision in a consolidated trade package or the NDAA, the various bills that have been before Congress and those that remain, to try and put in a straight one-year extension to allow for the Trump administration to be able to put its stamp on what AGOA looks like in terms of a reform. And given the approaching time, we think that that may be an impactful way to keep the program still viable. While it is possible to revive something that has lapsed, I think we take the lesson from the lapse of the GSP, which we know affects our North African colleagues particularly, but with the lapse of GSP going on 4 years, and the recognition that it's important has not in any way gotten us any closer to seeing that renewed. So we have to be clear-eyed about making sure that we can get what we can get done before September 30th and really being focused in on that. Just briefly, I thought it was really compelling when Ambassador Rakota Malala talked about the impact of AGOA in terms of job numbers, and both direct and indirect on the continent. We know that this administration is viewing everything through an America's First lens. And so while it feels outside of integrity to start with that, starting with the jobs connected to two-way African trade that are based in the United States is an important way to begin any conversation with this administration, because they are viewing AGOA through the benefit to the United States, as you know. But one of the things that we've heard as we've talked to Congress and talked to staffers, not just our U.S. Africa Business Center team, but the very robust team of congressional and policy leaders that work at the Chamber. A key consideration that leaders are wanting to know is not just the benefit to the United States of AGOA currently, but how will the United States be hurt by AGOA expiration? And so I encourage us all to be thoughtful about showing the implications, the harm that could come to the United States by its expiration, if that is not also part of the talking points in the conversation that is being had. You know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been very vocal in pushing against the reciprocal tariff regime. The outcome of August 1st and August 7th was not what any of us wanted. And certainly the Chamber continues to push, being very strategic about tangible harm that's caused by the tariffs, looking at the impact to small business, looking at the impact in particular sectors, looking at the cost to the average American citizen, and conversely, looking at those products that come from our partners around the world that are not produced in the United States, and what that loss of access means for U.S. consumers. That has been another approach that the Chamber has taken, and we are finding that that is also an effective way to get public sentiment focused on the harm caused by changing existing tariff rates and I guess existing trade partnerships that we continue to focus in on. We know that there is distrust and skepticism amongst this community of leaders around the power of multilateral engagement. And I want to be clear that there are detractors, and it's important to know that what those detractors are saying so that that can be countered. The Coalition for a Prosperous America just a few weeks ago published a long article that highlighted why AGOA should not be renewed. We have to be prepared and counter that point by point. The message is that Africa hasn't benefited from AGOA, it's been other countries. That this is a giveaway for third countries who are utilizing access to the continent to gain access to the United States, or that in some way AGOA hasn't generated a close relationship between the nations of Africa and the United States. And so we have to be clear-eyed in how we confront that. And we've continued to do that through our advocacy work. One of the main things we have done as the Chamber is really lean into supporting the Trump administration's commercial strategy for engagement with the continent. And so we start with this positive and the desire to see the president succeed in the 6-point strategy that was put forward by the State Department. And then we note the ways in which the policy approaches being taken could undercut the president's success and our desire to see the president succeed. And so being able to point out where this is a compelling program of engagement that's been put forward by the administration and the dangers of not seeing the president's policy through effectively has been one of the ways that we've countered some of the concerns and have pointed out you can't have a commercial strategy without the reauthorization of AGOA, without addressing visa restrictions and the abilities for businesses to be able to meet and to discuss commercial deals without the ability to travel and connect. And so we have raised those inconsistencies in the policies that could undercut the president's strategy as a means to try and elevate the opportunities to push forward. As we think about life beyond AGOA, and this is not in any way to suggest that it won't exist, but as you know, when the legislation was implemented 25 years ago, the AGOA Act contemplated a time going beyond an export-led development and growth provision, but to a mature trade and investment partnership. And certainly we need to emphasize that trajectory, that we have been traveling that path, and that there are opportunities to create mutual benefit between our countries, be it through the trade and commercial deals, the frameworks that are done, and really helping to deliver an optical win. I thought Landry's comment about using social media to be an important one. The benefit of what it looks like can have great implications for what actually gets concluded. So showcasing the power of a framework to get started, that power that delivers a win can help create an additional roadmap. But we do think that AGOA is but a stepping stone to an even broader and greater relationship. That includes our ongoing focus in on the AFCFTA and focus in on how do we continue to build those long-term trade partnerships that will be impervious to political shocks like the one that we are living through now. The last thing I'll add, because I believe I've gone on too long and I apologize for that, is as we think about how to creatively raise the stakes, one of the things that we have found to be effective in the past, and I'm sure you're already focused in on, is how to engage non-traditional pathways to get beyond Washington, not just in your advocacy, but in engaging diaspora communities to be very vocal in the districts where members of Congress are still learning about trade programs, learning about the power of the commercial partnership with the continent, and leaning into the power that faith-based institutions have played historically in AGOA, but particularly at a time right now where faith-based institutions and faith-based leaders have a strong pathway to work with the administration. We've seen that to be an effective vehicle in many other ways as well. And so I would not discount the power of continuing to lean in to those communities to help bring broad-based awareness to the dangers of letting AGOA expire, of the danger of letting this foundation crumble when we could continue to build on it in an effective and affirmative way. So with that, Excellency, let me turn the microphone back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra, for your perspectives. Thank you. Thank you. Now, let's shift attention to my left. Sure. Let's have your perspective.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Mosoto, and thank the African Union Mission, Tarek, and team for the invitation today. On behalf of Corporate Counsel, Flory Lazare would have loved to have been here. Unfortunately, is out of town this week. But again, I also perhaps to begin with a huge thank you to all of you for many of you have been we have been working closely with you for the last almost 3 years. Hard to believe this. On this AGOA renewal, thank you for your endurance, your perdurance, your continued belief in the long-term potential for the U.S.-Africa trade and investment relationship. So based on that, thank you. I'm also, I think, would forecast the next 3 months are going to be harder and more involved than the last 3 years. So I think picking up on Landry's point, Tarek, perhaps you should already be booking an early October session for some follow-on actions. So with that, I think I would like to pick up on some of the themes from the opening panel as well as some of the points that Kendra made. I'm delighted. I'm not the only optimist in the room. I too actually think that AGOA does have. I'll fudge a little bit. I'll say a 51% chance of passage by September 30th. In part because I think there's just enough people in the right places in Congress that understand how important this platform is, how many companies do business under it, both in the United States as well as in Africa. And I think most of them understand that breaking something is a lot harder than building something. Also, there's the challenge of if you break something or if you don't renew it, then there's the question of, well, now what? And GSP is a weekly reminder for these very same committees of if you don't have a follow-on policy, that this can be very painful in terms of constituents making the case week in, week out. With that, I would temper the optimism by suggesting this is not going to, I don't think AGOA will be renewed early, September 10th or something. I think it'll be midnight on the 30th, if it is by the 30th. And then one other piece of all of this, you will all become more expert in the details or the minutiae of our legislative processes than you ever needed to or wanted to. The key question is choice of vehicle. And Kendra mentioned a couple, and this actually becomes, frankly, the tactical becomes the strategic in this case. My guess is there will not be a separate trade bill in the next 35 days. Part of the problem is if you did that, you would have to do something about GSP, and the politics are too big. So if there is no trade bill, then what do you have? Probably the only train leaving the station in the next 35 days would be the budget. In this case, this is something called a continuing resolution that theoretically needs to be passed by September 30th to avoid a shutdown. And so this is the shutdown that to which Kendra was referring. I have no idea. It's going to be a wild 35 days, but today I would tell you that there's some bad blood regarding budget issues, and I would think a shutdown is quite likely. Maybe only for a couple of weeks. They usually become politically bruising for the party in power. And so maybe by mid-October, end of October, something passes, and then whatever was in the CR passes together. So if we're looking at scenarios, I might put my money on that one. All this means explaining this to your capitals is going to be very hard. I think, so what to do about all of this? Oh, by the way, one other thing. So Kendra mentioned one other option, the NDAA, the one department in the government that always gets its budget is the Defense Department. The NDAA could be a target, but that's probably by December. And so the choice of vehicles, so when you're meeting with congressional allies and they tell you, oh, it's going to be this vehicle, watch very carefully for what the timing is, because these trains have schedules, I guess is the point. I will offer just a couple of quick thoughts on substance, tactics, and way forward. I think it's important for you to understand that certainly the House, I think also the Senate, would vastly prefer to reauthorize AGOA for 10 years. Why? One, they understand there's a commercial reality to this, and that, to be perfectly frank, for most companies, a 12-month reauthorization is completely useless. What do you do in 12 months? You get a few more shipments in, and that's it. You can't do new investments, sign up new contracts, things like that. 2 years isn't much better. All that said, this may be whatever the art of the deal, to use a phrase within the administration, is. The big question from Congress is, if we break a lot of eggs to pass something like AGOA and probably Haiti, will the president sign it? And there are key parts within the administration, we think, that aren't quite sure if they like trade preference programs. And so this is where the tension is between, well, maybe it's only 1 year and we can, quote unquote, align AGOA with America First. I'll come back to that in a moment. But so be aware that if it's only 1 year, that's a big issue. Please also understand that you are not alone in trying to sort through all of this. Please understand that this is not a kind of an African neglect issue. Europe is going through this. Frankly, China is going through this. Latin America, Brazil, India, all of much bigger trading partners are going through the same complete lack of certainty. There's no broader framework, et cetera. And then all of this, so perhaps the one issue I might suggest a refinement on from the opening plenary, this is no longer just about AGOA. The administration has inextricably linked it to what's now being called the arts, these bilateral tariffs, in that in some ways you have this psychological disconnect, I think, between you're talking about AGOA and a long-term trade and investment relationship. USTR or State Department are talking to you about a bilateral deal that is primarily focused on tariffs and or what kind of investment with what kind of company is there. Those two conversations need to come together. They haven't been joined on India or EU or China, et cetera. And so if there's this question of, well, how do we do this? Africa may actually be the first one to jump these tracks or to unite these themes. I think I would suggest to you, just in terms of maybe shifting to how to make this argument, I think Kendra's advice is very, very good in terms of focusing on the America side of it. I would suggest to you that perhaps leverage the fact that U.S.-Africa trade is 1% of our total trade. Make that a strength, not a weakness. And so in some ways, demonstrably, U.S.-Africa trade is not the cause of America's persistent trade deficits. If you will, Africa is not China, not Europe. And so Africa is not the problem that the Trump administration is trying to solve. You are in a position to make the argument Africa is the opportunity. And this is another piece where in a lot of cases, there is no coherent description of what is an America First trade agenda. There's an executive order. Good luck trying to make sense of it. I will confess personally, so as a Native American, I read this and still didn't really, I could not translate that into 4 policy areas. This is what this means. There is obviously a key part of reducing a trade deficit, and that's where the tariffs and things like that come in. But there's also a clear appetite to quote unquote do deals. And this is where I think Africa is perhaps best positioned globally to make this argument that there, frankly, in all of the areas or many of the areas that are core areas for core sources for U.S. prosperity, Africa is offering the greatest opportunities. So be it infrastructure, financing, ICT, new energy, things like that, through a number of mechanisms that are already out there in terms of your creating regional value chains, et cetera, facts on the ground. This is just happening. I would, picking up on Kendra's worthy caution, be very careful. I think it's very important to stress that AFCFTA is real without making it sound like it's a UN program, if that makes any sense, because this multilateral thing there's an allergic reaction to it. So I think if you talk about regional value chains, opening markets of hundreds of millions, Ambassador, I think highlighting things like a US SADC dialogue, those are things that frankly, I follow Africa, and I had missed that you had that. So I think those kinds of developments will help illustrate that there are hundreds of millions of people in markets that are looking at how to do all this. Perhaps the last point on this is just many of you, maybe a dozen of your countries, have already put really innovative offers on the table. And to put this in I guess, English, so all the trade barriers that U.S. government folks or U.S. companies have complained about for the last 15, 20 years, many of you have very adroitly put together in these tariff packages. But there is perhaps uniting the two themes. Obviously, in some ways, if you're going to be offering deals to U.S. companies or market access, you also need some kind of, you need your market access to be addressed. And so that means if there isn't an AGOA renewal, then you need to recreate an AGOA. And this is where I think Congress would tell the administration recreating is harder than continuing. And so if you wanted to renew AGOA, perhaps with some small changes, et cetera, that's better than, but link it to the arts is maybe one way to do this. To align AGOA to make it America first, you can argue that AGOA already is America first. I would perhaps just a final thought on where does this leave us. So I would underline that unlike in past renewals, where is the tape at the end of the race? What does victory look like? Victory should not look like AGOA is renewed on midnight, on September 30th. Victory should look like uniting these two tracks, figuring out some way on the bilateral tariffs as well as AGOA to form the basis for some broader, longer term, ideally two-way trade and investment relationship. That is not going to be wrapped up by October 1st, but if you laid the groundwork, I think that's the kind of thing to have continued discussions, et cetera. And I would offer I would argue AGOA should be a key part of that package. Be very careful about what's in the AGOA renewal. I think that the last tactical point is I think AGOA renewal, if it's in the CR, it'll probably be 2 or 3 lines. And so it'll probably be changing a date. If there is a sense of, if it's only 1 year, be very careful about people who tell you, oh, we have plenty of time now to talk about a top to bottom realignment, or we can restructure the program. Washington has been having that discussion for 3 years. The reality is that there are 4 or 5 simple changes. It's things like addressing graduation. It's things like finding some way to include North Africa. It's things like maybe not an annual renewal, but an annual review, but every 3 years. It's very simple, practical, non-controversial changes. I would strongly caution you against overly ambitious or complicated provisions in that 1 year, whatever that year might end up being. That year will be 6 months, by the way, because next year is an election year. Be very careful about what could pass through Congress, but stay away from things like changing rules of origin, et cetera. I was very happy Kendra mentioned the point, this this group that frankly hadn't had much of a profile until last fall has suddenly emerged as the anti-AGOA group. But one of the key themes they're pushing is somehow this is a stalking horse, particularly for China as well as for India. And we are starting to hear blowback, odd concerns from people in the administration of AGOA benefits China. And of course you ask, okay, please walk me through how does AGOA benefit China? And no one can explain it yet, but there's this fear. So this tells me don't change things like rules of origin, or this way, don't lower them. If you're raising them as part of AFCFTA, that makes sense, but focus on the US-Africa piece of it, because that also plays to your bilateral strategies, et cetera. Very, very last thing, you have a lot of allies. My fifth last thing, sorry about that. You have a lot of allies, and I think the point is leverage each one of them. So for instance, Kendra made a really important point that the Chamber, an incredibly powerful, very important organization, is leading a fight against these tariffs, et cetera. CCA is a much humbler organization, and we're focused on just finding some way through this morass. We are not taking a position on the tariffs, but I think this is the point, is play to your allies' strengths. In terms of if you're going to have a discussion about tariffs, then maybe engaging Kendra and team makes most sense. We can perhaps help you on other aspects, but play the team.
Thank you. Thank you, Led. Thank you. Thank you for your insights, your thoughts, and your advice. They mean a lot. I hope when it's tea time, because the wish is to give the room an opportunity later on to throw in their thoughts and questions to the panelists. I suppose you can go on, right? Okay. Tony, please.
Kilabon, Tante. Great to see everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I'm weekly standing in for my colleague Zainab Usman, who you all know. And if you know her, you admire the work that she's done for so many years. She's just a brilliant analyst and advocate for Africa. And I'm sorry that she couldn't be here. But it's really hard to follow my good friends, Kendra and Laird, who've really laid out, I think, a very compelling picture of the landscape of where we stand right now. I just add one sort of other legislative twist. I mean, the bill does have dual jurisdiction between the Ways and Means Committees and the Foreign Relations Committees. And if you talk to the House Foreign Relations or Foreign Affairs Committee right now, they're focused on the reauthorization process for the entire foreign affairs legislation. So they're really not right now willing to even countenance any real discussion on AGOA renewal until Chairman Mast gets what he wants, which is this bill, which will be marked up on September 17th. So you might want to put that on your calendars. That's going to be an important moment in the legislation of this month. Brinkmanship. This administration loves brinkmanship. So I'm not giving up on the idea that something could happen on and before September 30. And I remind many of the people in this room, some of the people on this panel for sure, remember the last time that AGOA had to be authorized. We were at the State Department, and Ishmael will like this. We were at the also nearing expiry of AGOA. It was during the AGOA forum in September at the State Department, and we were held up because the Senate Finance Committee had a rift with the administration about some nominee or some sort of issue that was preventing them from moving this legislation. So I sent your former trade minister up to meet Senator Hatch's team on the Trade Minister Davies, Rob Davies, up to the committee to lobby on behalf of the bill. And I remember afterwards, Everett Eisenstadt, who many of you know, was the staff director of the Senate Finance Committee, and they basically had their arms twisted to get the bill out. And Stuart's comment to me was, don't ever send me Rob Davies again at the last minute to try to get something done. Rob really weighed in at the right moment. And the point that I'm making is that no voice is stronger than your collective voices here. I was here for the beginning of AGOA, and I was citing this earlier today, It was the leadership of the African embassies that really pushed us across the line. So I think it's important that you engage Congress, and I think it's really important that you engage the White House on why this is important. And one of the reasons this is important is it really doesn't matter that much. $8 billion represents less than half of 1% of our total imports, the AGOA eligible products. This is really a de minimis situation. I was just looking at the budget for Fairfax County, which is just across the river here. The budget for Fairfax County is $6 billion this year. So it's now almost roughly equivalent for total African exports to the United States. This isn't really a big deal. And we can make you can do a lot of harm in your relations with Africa by not doing something that's pretty simple and straightforward. You're going to hear later from Steve Landy, my colleague and friend and mentor in many ways in trade, who's going to talk a little bit about why he thinks there's an opportunity for this to be done via an executive order. I know many people don't believe that that could occur, but Steve will lay out the reasons why he thinks this could happen. And let me remind you lastly, when I asked the current USTR Greer about the prospects of renewing AGOA before he was confirmed, he said that this administration would not really go to the mat on not renewal of AGOA because he understood that it had an enormous amount of legislative support in its past iterations. So this is not something to really go to the mat on. So I'm going to concentrate on a couple of things that really more address my area of expertise, which is in the area of critical minerals. I see Mauritania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Botswana. These are countries, South Africa, with vast mineral wealth. And there we have a common interest because Africa represents about 30% of the global critical minerals supply. We don't, the United States, really have more than 5% of ability to be able to satisfy our demand. So we have to look elsewhere, and Africa is the best place to look because it has the most amount of unexplored resource opportunity, and also you can get it across the line faster than many other jurisdictions where you have a lot more legislative and environmental hurdles. Not to say that you're not having safeguards in environmental, but I do think that Africa has an opportunity to get to these minerals more quickly than elsewhere. So we have a win-win opportunity. The U.S. economy needs Africa critical minerals, and you also need the investment and the jobs that critical minerals will be able to generate for your economies. So I think it's important that we look at where this sector can also help motivate not only the passage of AGOA, but a deepening of our economic relationship with Africa. Now, many of the critical minerals who are left off are not tariffed by either AGOA or not subject to the surplus reciprocity tariffs that were articulated by the White House. But one of the areas that I think that we want to examine is the opportunity of processing those minerals in Africa. Because all of you in this room and many countries have even gone to export bans, which we won't discuss. I'm against them, but that's not the topic of this conversation. But I do think that the idea here of being able to partner with U.S. companies and technologies to do mineral processing, and I'm on the board of one of those, ReElement, is the opportunity to process those minerals in some intermediate form, exporting them to the United States, and have those products of processed minerals also be exempt from both any surplus tariffs, so that those processed products can come in without any duty. I think will be a real opportunity for us, and I think it will be of interest to the American companies that are in that area. I think America has a couple of big advantages relative to other trade partners that you have in the mining space. First of all, we have premier institutions in the United States, academic institutions that can, I think, help. I was just in Stanford for Mineral X, and we're bringing Mineral X to the Mining Indaba in Cape Town. And this is an opportunity of using machine learning and AI tools to advance the exploration, production, processing, and end use of critical minerals. I think we're really stepping into this space to show where the U.S. can compete. We're also looking at ways to try to avail creative capital in the United States to invest in the mining sector. Because I remember Moletsy and Becky once said, we're not going to compete head-to-head with China on just the volume. Where we're going to compete head-to-head to China is where we have competitive advantages, and one of those advantages is the deployment of creative capital. So we're going to look at that, and the U.S. government can aid that through such things as the DFC. I think the other area that we need to look at and have this discussion with the administration in the critical mineral space is that we need to align with those countries that we also share a common interest in being able to secure supply chains. And this mineral security partnership, which was articulated in the last administration And if you saw last week, the main mining executives from Australia were in the White House. The idea that we need to partner with countries like Australia and Canada and be able to pursue and bring our mutual strengths into bear is, I think, something that we really need to consider and support going forward. I think the changing trade landscape right now also creates opportunities that many of you may not have thought about. First of all, China is basically going to be out of the jewelry business if these tariffs hold. About 50% of processed jewelry comes from one location in India, Surat, India, which does much of the processing. We see Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Angola, all are diamond producing countries. I think the opportunity here now is to try to shift some of that value addition production from India to Africa. I do really think now that you have the diamonds, you need to develop the capacity. This is not heavy, this is more about human labor than it is about heavy equipment and capital intensity. I think there's an opportunity for Africa to step into this space. Also, India exports $14 billion a year of textiles to the United States. $14 billion a year of textiles to the United States. That's an opportunity for Africa to step into, take advantage of where those materials came from and step into the area of textile production. You know, I mean, the reality is that apparel production is not particularly capital intensive. It's more about sewing machines and human labor. I think there's an opportunity to probably step into that space for Africa. I think that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement was mentioned. Not every country is going to be able to process all the minerals. I think there's going to have to be agreements among African countries that you can do something in Namibia that might be originally processed or mined in Botswana, or in Kenya, you might be doing the processing of stuff that's mined in the DRC, or vice versa. You know, it's going to have to be an opportunity to look at not everybody duplicating the same thing. There's going to have to be agreements among African countries that you're going to have to basically be able to share mineral bounty and be able to do it in an economic way. And that's going to require, I think, the development of an African Continental Free Trade Agreement that's going to really allow that to happen. So I think it's important that we look at advancing how Africa is taking advantage of this ambition that it has to create more intra-Africa trade and processing. Instrumental in that relationship, it's certainly in Southern Africa, is the engagement of South Africa. South Africa has more technical capacity than any of the other countries in Africa pertaining to mining. I think South Africa has a lot of opportunities to invest in other African countries in doing mineral processing or to do processing in South Africa. They're essential in the supply chain in terms of the mineral sector. South Africa's exclusion from AGOA is, I think, a detriment to all of Africa. And I would urge all of you to step up to the plate here, as I did a year ago when we had this meeting, saying that I think it's important that we make a common endorsement that South Africa should be an instrumental part of AGOA, just as Kenya is the instrumental driver in East Africa. South Africa is the instrumental driver in Southern Africa. We need these as sort of linchpins to continue economic engagement, and I think their exclusion would be very detrimental. So that's a comment that may or may not have anything to do with the renewal of AGOA, but it's something that I think is important to look at. A couple other aspects here that I'd like to talk about pertaining to the mining industry. There's only one country in this room that has open data on mining, and that country is Malawi. Okay? Open data basically transformed the oil and gas industry, right? Making your oil and gas licenses available for exploration and for discovery by mining oil and gas companies transformed that industry overnight. Africa is still holding on to its information, thinking that it's some security interest. I think if you really want to advance the mining industry, I think you should follow the lead of Malawi and Nigeria, which basically opens up their data for companies to look at what is potentially available. So kudos to Malawi. And then lastly, on the AGOA and where to bring private sector interest to bear on AGOA and other economic engagement in Africa, I think we need to go down the value chain. It's the Microsofts of the world, it's the GMs and Fords of the world that use the platinum from South Africa, that use the titanium that comes from the DRC, that uses the manganese that might come from Namibia, or the chrome that comes from Zimbabwe. You know, these are end users that rely very much upon these critical minerals, and they are basically a partner in yours in trying to get the attention of the U.S. government, particularly in this day and age where we're become so dependent upon China for so many of these products. So I think there's an opportunity there to engage with the end users of these critical minerals and have them come to bat for you in terms of getting the interest and support from the administration and from Congress. So I'm going to leave it there. I think we have some room for questions and answers, but I really appreciate the opportunity, Tarek, to come. I think it's not going to be an easy battle, but I'm still hopeful that given the spirit of brinkmanship, that we will come out, somehow pull a rabbit out of the hat and get AGOA renewed and extended. I think I understand Laird's comments about not trying to make it too complicated here if we're going to do this. I think an extension, a simple extension for 1 or 2 years is probably the best that we can hope for. And then, we'll just have to revisit what comes next and what to include. I think improvements that we've talked about the review process, but I think there are things that I'm a little bit more ambitious than Laird on what we might be able to do with AGOA in the next iteration, but I do think we have to be realistic about what we can expect. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Allow me to abuse my privilege of being a moderator and throw in my questions first. And to Kendra, from a business perspective, what areas would the U.S. business community wish to see them reflected in the renewed AGOA? Are there any critical changes that the U.S. business is saying for AGOA to move forward, for us to certainly support renewal extension, would want to reflected in AGOA going forward? Then to let you talked about the CR, that's the most likely available window for inclusion of AGOA. But in the past few months, we have been down the same road before. There were attempts to include AGOA in the past CR and other bills, but the understanding is that there was clear pushback from White House that the AGOA and other programs of similar nature should not be included in the CR. What hope do we have that now there wouldn't be similar pushback from White House, especially when White House hasn't come out clearly to pronounce itself on its position regarding AGOA. And when you talk to Congress, the narrative is that we are still waiting for a cue from the White House, and I would suppose that the pushback may be sending negative signals to Congress. The pushback that the White House has given in the past may send negative signals to Congress. So my question overall is can we be optimistic that I fully understand, I agree with you that this is the only available immediate wagon that we can use to get AGOA through. But considering the importance of the reconciliation bill, considering the looming government shutdown, would White House not wish for Congress to just focus on the bill in its pure form without being clouded by other issues? That would be my question to you. And to Tony, you have in the past written a lot and said a lot about the intersection between trade and geopolitics. And with, for a lack of better word, let me say, there is an obsession in Washington to counter China's influence globally, and in this instance, in Africa, to counter China's influence in Africa. And as American companies divest from China, and with the looming expiration of AGOA, how would the U.S. then counter China's influence in Africa when there's no other meaningful economic engagement strategy in place, and how can we leverage on that, the threat that China poses to America's interests in Africa? How can we leverage on that to demonstrate the importance of AGOA continuity in Africa? Those will be my questions to the panelists. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador, you have posed very thoughtful questions to all of us. And I'll invite my colleagues to weigh in on the question you posed to me, as well as I know that they are quite active and engaged in all these areas. Your question, Excellency, was around what sort of conditions or what areas that the business community would like to see in terms of enhancing and modifying AGOA. And let me just say at the outset that the business community, in a broad, and I'm going to say in a vast generalization, would like to see AGOA reauthorized. They haven't put particular specific conditions in place they'd like to see before they'd like to see AGOA reauthorized. They would like to see it reauthorized. Now, if we had the benefit of time, which we did have several years ago, and Laird and myself and various other alliance, and coalitions have been looking at AGOA, there are certainly ways to enhance the effectiveness of AGOA, but that's not what's on the table right now. Companies want to see greater connectivity between Africa and the United States, greater opportunity to trade in goods, to finance goods, to be part of, building out value chains. But again, if we have the benefit of time in the future, once AGOA is reauthorized, to look at modifications, would be to consider how to incorporate the digital economy, into AGOA, because that services aspect of our, a vital part of all of our economies is not presently represented. It would be looking at how to extend the windows of evaluation so that every year there's not an eligibility consideration, because that doesn't create long-term certainty for companies to be able to make business decisions, to receive financing for long windows, to make their orders, and the like. And so some, I'd say, mechanical changes to make sure that it is fit for purpose, in our current economy. But what the business community would like to see now is the reauthorization, period. So thank you for the question.
Ambassador Masoto, thank you very much. I think maybe just to add on a couple of very small details to Kendra's, I think, very good response to your first question. I think in terms of details, 100%, the companies are looking for certainty. And so number one is AGOA in place or not? It's at this point, it's a yes, no, because literally, well, we're within the shipping window for most African exporters. And so they're really kind of wondering, do we hold the shipment? Do we send it? And so literally that certainty thing is the number one. Exactly to Kendra's point, I think some simplifications would make it easier, because this frankly all enhances certainty. I think, as all of you know, the annual review process is painful. A vast majority of African countries have no problem, but you have to go through this miserable 6 weeks, 8-week report thing. Why? So I think those are issues. I think in general, why not incorporate North Africa? Just in that makes it easier rather than people having to have a map, taped to their computer screen. who's eligible kind of thing would be out there. And then the graduation, I think, makes a lot of sense for people. They would love to hear kind of a, where does this go? I would suggest there's been one addition to that company wish list, which has come out with since January 21st. There's been suddenly a lot of confusion on the hyper-technical level as CBP inspectors in Miami have different interpretations than those in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
With, is this shipment AGOA eligible or not?
Yeah.
And so I think in some cases, some greater clarification of the textile provisions shall be implemented by CBP thusly. And I think there's also some interesting questions coming out with the reciprocal tariff discussions of, well, now, wait a minute, how does that, are there rebate provisions? How does that work with AGOA? And then there's the broader question of what is the MFN base? So if it's not going to be zero, what is it? And so I would put that in the clarity basket, but suggest that the baskets become a little bigger than it was. I think the one other very brief piece on the, I think most U.S. companies would also argue that U.S. and Africa need to go beyond AGOA, certainly to include things like a digital partnership one way or another, certainly to include critical minerals, lots of other investment issues. And the one expiration we haven't talked about yet is on October 5th. DFC's expiration, authorization expires. And so I think that would be another thing that's out there. How do we know the CR is going to work? We don't. However, one key obstacle no longer has an office in the White House. So that, I think, is one important note, personal note. The other piece of it is, I think in the spring, there was an issue with the Big Beautiful Bill in terms of the Office of White House Counsel apparently had an objection because it was a trade preference program. Apparently, we hear there's a rumor that there's been some discussion of senior people unnamed that understand that something needs to happen to allow trade preference programs to continue, including AGOA and Haiti. And so that therefore, basically, the point is if you have to find a way to continue them, stop blocking. If the answer is yes, stop blocking the vehicle.
Well, I could probably teach a course on geopolitical competition between Africa and China, but I don't have time nor right now the bandwidth to do so. Let me point out a couple of things. When we mine down particularly in the context of South Africa, and when you look at what South Africa exports to the United States versus what South Africa exports to China, and many other countries are similarly situated, is most of the products that go to China are unprocessed raw materials. The products that wind up in the United States are products that are value addition, okay? So there's more value for your economy by engaging the U.S. in exports because we take a more sophisticated mix, if you would, of products. So I think one of the things that we can put onto the table in terms of discussing is that the U.S., Africa favors the U.S. as an export market for those reasons. We just don't take unprocessed products. We take products that have had value addition. The other area that I think we need to be cognizant of, and I'm not here to be an apologist for you multilateral or multinational corporations, but I do think it's fair to say that the companies from the United States and like-minded jurisdictions such as Australia and Canada do behave, at least in the natural resources sector, at a higher standard than Chinese companies do. I think we've seen just recently evidence of that in Zambia, where there was a huge mine spill by a Chinese mine, which has created enormous amount of environmental damage in Zambia, which is, last time I looked, it's the water table of Southern Africa, Zambia. So this affects all the countries in Southern Africa. So I do think that U.S. companies and like-minded jurisdictions operate at a different standard from a standpoint of responsibility. And therefore, I think they should be favored investors in terms of bringing them in to operate because they'll operate on a higher standard. And moreover, I think it's fair to say, and I think Chinese perhaps unfairly demonized here for not doing more in terms of human capacity development. But I think it's fair to say that when American companies do set up business in Africa or other countries, that we do more in terms of developing local human capacity, in terms of training and bringing in management and so forth. I think there's certainly an advantage there that the U.S. is going to wind up having more transfer and leave more behind when they leave, rather than a sort of a cut and rip operations, which many Chinese companies always have. And then lastly, to revisit the comments that I made earlier, I think where the U.S. has, I think its great advantage is that we have great technology which we're willing to share. In the natural resources sector, as I indicated, we have great institutions, Stanford, Purdue, the Colorado School of Mines, where I'd gone to school, have great capacities in developing and sharing their expertise with Africa. And I urge you to engage with that. Our national laboratories, which are unfortunately under threat right now, are also a great tool to be able to develop a technology and share that technology with Africa, which I don't think is likely to be as done regularly by Chinese companies. So I think it's an ongoing issue. I think we can't run away from the fact that the Chinese are big competitors to us. And in many instances, they're playing chess and we're playing checkers in terms of our relationship with Africa. I recognize that. But I do think that we have some strong cards to play, and I think we should play them. And I think you should ask for them. And I think, and I'm going to close because I've got a meeting downtown, but I do think the greatest advocate for AGOA and a post-AGOA engagement with Africa is in this room. I think I saw it when AGOA was passed. We had a strong diplomatic engagement with both the White House and also on the Hill. We aligned ourselves with private sector organizations such as the U.S. Chamber. CCA I had to drag them along a little bit at that time, but they eventually did come in full force. I think that you have to be, though, at the forefront in terms of advocating for this economic relationship with Africa and the United States. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you. I have two panelists who have to rush. Are there any direct pressing questions to Kendra or Tony? It's a direct question, not a general question. Because I would love to release them. So if it's a general question, CCA, we can take care of that. But if it's a direct question, I'll give you that opportunity. You want to continue? Yes. Okay, please.
Thank you, moderator. I'll try to be very short and precise. Okay. I'll touch on the question that you made on how we are going to make to counter China. The Americans are going to counter China and Africa. And my question is related to the issue of inclusion. And I heard from Layard that there's been advocacy for the inclusion of North African countries. My question is, there are other countries such as mine, we have always been excluded out of AGOA since inception for political reasons, we believe. And I also believe there are other countries that are suspended. So when we are discussing issues of trade and investment partnerships in a new trade landscape, and we are not talking about these countries, and some of us have potential in critical minerals, the textile industry, jewelry production, and we are excluded, and there's nothing or not much being said about our inclusion in AGOA. How does that help with countering China and expanding trade partnerships? Thank you.
Okay.
You want to take the three here, and then we'll run?
Are they direct or general? Direct? Okay. Eswatini.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to pose my question, and also to thank the panel for their incisive insight. I would like to seek guidance from the panel on process, basically on the approach of the African lobby to address the challenges posed by country-specific agreements which are piloted by the office of the USTR. And in my view, I think this may complicate our multilateral engagement and could pose a risk for African unity. So basically dealing at what you call a death knell to the AGOA process as a landmark economic vehicle between Africa and the United States. But I also recognize that I may be mixing the issues here, talking about AGOA renewal and this process on the side. But I would like to seek your counsel on what should be the approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Namibia.
Thank you, Chair. And I would also like to air my views on the great panelists that we had, the previous one as well as this one. And it was a very active discussion. Now, I am a little bit puzzled at the moment whether there really is positivity. I'm feeling very negative towards the reauthorization. But I take all that you have said. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because it seems that the goalposts have shifted. People are now concentrating on taking over Union Station. And people are now concentrating on taking over cities and states. So will we ever get that opportunity to get the attention for us to get to this before end of September? I wish very much that, we can concentrate on Congress, and that Congress, together with our partners in the private sector, you are assisting us a lot and we appreciate it. But we are in agreement that all these things you are talking about, reauthorization, exclusion of countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, and so on, graduation, these things are important. Now, when we get the reauthorization, I don't know how far we can push to get these issues also included, because to us it's a compact. And to them it's a divide and rule. As one of you were rightfully saying, that some of the Congress people would say, they do it on an individual basis, country by country, and by so doing divide and rule. And that to us is a big concern. The issue of China, yes, but it's very interesting that the US is offering 60,000 students to come to, Chinese students to come here. But there's a trade war. It's a tussle between them, but in the meantime, also there is some cooperation. So I don't know if it's like, you must show more muscle, but we don't want to show muscle. We fought enough. What we want to fight for is our sovereignty and our independence. So for us, it is very important, and I think it's also very important that we look at value addition, and we are, in our countries in Africa, we are now saying we want value addition. That's important. But I would also like to see that the SADC-US records on renewal come to us so that we can also bring it in sync with what we are discussing. So that, then we can come up with a collective as to how we move collectively together. And finally, the AFCFTA really is something that we are saying, indeed, what you were putting there, Mr. Lard, and also Kendra, and I think also Tony came in with very valuable points, is that, yes, we brought innovative offers on the table. But as it stands now, we have the tariffs, and you have AGOA. Now the two, they are in sync, because you cannot have AGOA while you have tariffs. How do you do that? So that's my question to you. I got a call from our investors yesterday. So, Ambassador, please tell us now, should we continue? These people are exporting from Namibia to the US in 46 states already. Should we continue because we are hanging in the air? This 15% with AGOA on the one hand. Should we still continue this month to export from Namibia? So that is an ask that I have. That is very confusing at the moment.
Okay, do I have to run? Just let me.
Please, I was actually saying that unless there's something specific you think you have to address, I know my colleague here is capable enough to address all those.
Yes, okay. Well, let me just mention to my colleague from Eswatini, I think you can actually do both. I think in your discussions with the USTR on specific trade issues and negotiations, that's one space. But the idea of advocating that Africa is important in all aspects of our relationship, whether it be trade or whether it be geopolitical, whatever, I think it's important that Africa advocate for itself and not necessarily get confused with your specific trade negotiations with USTR. So I think you can do both. I think you can say at a collective level, Africa is really important to the United States from an economic, geopolitical standpoint, but then you have to wall off your specific negotiations with the USTR. I think you can do both. I have to run, I apologize.
Please, yeah, excuse. Okay.
I'll just quickly respond to my sister from Zimbabwe around the question of inclusion. I'll be honest, the discussions right now have been about just keeping AGOA viable. I recognize that doesn't address the fact that countries like Zimbabwe are outside of the program, but our focus has been on getting it renewed and getting it improved, once it's continued. That doesn't offer you relief. We are attuned and quite honestly hearing from companies that want to make sure that we're doing more in Zimbabwe and building those relationships. So we're trying to do it similar to the way Tony said you have to do things in two ways. We're trying to approach these things in two ways, but trying to keep it on the table so it doesn't lapse the way that GSP has, gives us a little bit more flexibility to call for expansion, reintroduction of countries and the like. So thank you for the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. I know you also have to run.
Indeed.
I know you are already overstayed by 30 minutes.
A little bit. But it was worth it.
Thanks,
Thank you,
thanks for
Excellencies.
overstaying.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Laird, for taking for the rest of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah.
Ambassadors, thank you very much for three excellent questions. I think maybe just to add some amendations, just to build on a little bit of what Kendra and Tony have both said. I think at least on the eligibility side of it, I think Kendra has framed it well in that what we have been arguing, what we have heard particularly from the foreign relations committees. So maybe to back up, the Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee would violently object to my good friend Tony's characterization that it's joint oversight. They would argue that period, end of sentence, the trade stuff has to come from the trade committees. That said, the question of eligibility is an inherent kind of domain or interest from both Senate Foreign Relations and House International Relations. I think the way the trade committees have been trying to steer this for 2.5 years is renew the framework. Once you have the framework for ideally 10 years, 2 years, 1 year, whatever that is, then let's revisit what are we doing on eligibility. Because there's a separate, just to be diplomatic about it, every country in Africa that has lost AGOA eligibility has a story worth discussing. There are some really good, I think, lessons learned from countries that have lost, once and forever. Others that have lost it for a couple of years, and so the turn on, turn off hasn't really worked either. And so I think there's a lot of sensitivity within Congress as to, is this the right lever or mechanism to use to address these, what are frankly generally foreign policy concerns? Is there some other vehicle? And so I think this is, if I might be so bold as to suggest, I think this is a really good kind of beyond AGOA agenda for the African Union in general, and then probably individual countries to also pitch to the U.S. government, to the State Department, to the National Security Council for, look, we want to have a longer term, 10, 20, 50-year relationship, and it really can't yo-yo. This doesn't, based on one report or one event or whatever, we should have a stronger, more robust framework, whatever that is. And if we have political issues, arguably those should be in a political framework. And I totally defer to you, but if the African Union or African countries, maybe even regions, are open to establishing that kind of a dialogue, that might actually by itself kind of address those concerns. So that's maybe a post September 30 agenda, but recognizing it's an absolutely critical one. On the conjoining, so this is in some ways, Ambassador, what I was trying to talk about with the two tracks. There is, sir, I think you put it really well, absolutely no way that any country in Africa, any company in Africa can look at a divided bilateral tariffs on one side, AGOA on the other. Because at the end of the day, there is a product that's in a crate that's going to Philadelphia. The Customs and Border Patrol guy needs to know what's the duty. Did the person pay it or not? And so there needs to be clarity. And I think the fact that the administration, with great respect to them, they have backed into this. And so, my outside interpretation is the big tariff board that was listed with whatever the formula was. I don't think there was a lot of real foreign policy or foreign trade policy strategy that went into that, nor do I think there was any appreciation for instance, some European countries were included in the same boat. There's a European Union common market. There are African, there are regional communities with common tariffs. There's SACU, SADC, et cetera. And so the point is, you guys are not a bilateral economy. You are inherently a regional economy. And so I think in some ways that is the perfect pivot that you can, that I would recommend you consider in terms of making back that, look, it's not about the bilateral tariffs. It's about the economic opportunity. And the opportunity is a SACU, SADC, cross-continental value chain opportunity rather than a bilateral tariff opportunity. In some ways, USTR, by taking too narrow a view, is giving up a delta of economic gain for both parties. And so I think there is a way where each country can make this argument, let's not leave value on the table for either side. And that, I think USTR may be stuck in a rut, but I think other parties, White House, Treasury, Commerce, State, Congress will understand that broader piece. One thing that hasn't come up so far, please do use your home team. Use everybody on your team, including if you have heads of state or ministers coming for the UN General Assembly, if you're staging visits to Washington, et cetera. I think to the extent that all of your heads of state are telling President Trump that this is an African priority, it's not just an Eswatini priority, it's an African priority, a SACU priority, a SADC priority, and we are a regional market. That I think will start breaking through, because I guarantee that's not how President Trump is thinking about it. So if you can change his trope, you may change some of the outcome. Madam Ambassador, on the confusion, I deeply sympathize with you. So since January 21st, this has been, we have an alliance of trade associations dedicated to supporting AGOA renewal. This has been so January, then April, then May, then August, and every time there's a new CBP announcement, and so you never know when your mailbox is going to blow up, because some shipment landed and the answer is suddenly changed. This is, from a private sector standpoint, this is not how you run a railroad. And we have told everyone who will listen that we are aware of dozens, maybe now probably 100 investments that were not extended, investments that were not completed, factories that are now being shut down, et cetera, because nobody knows. And these companies need to make 24 is a short, 24 months is a short planning. 48, 60, 72 is more kind of the time frame they're making. And if they don't know, then they're in shutdown mode, because it's, that sounds like risk. And in the current environment, you're mitigating risk, not extending risk. So again, I think this is, it gives you a talking point, if you will, that the unintended confusion is something that is a tax, and I would consider carefully using your words, challenging the Trump administration by imposing taxes will get their attention. And so if you tell them this is an uncertainty tax that is costing American jobs as well as African, that's the kind of thing that I think you should provoke a discussion of, well, tell me more.
Thank you. I know everyone is enjoying the discussion, but I'm afraid we are already eating on the time for the next session. We even haven't had coffee break. Oh, sorry about that. We even haven't had a coffee break. I was about to close, but I'll make an exception for South Africa, because otherwise I don't have access to a road home if I don't give him that opportunity. So to maintain relations, neighborly relations, let me give South Africa the opportunity, then we can close this session. Okay.
Amongst the pigeons, but I have a kind of a question. Just towards, I forgot the name. Tony. Tony alluded to brinkmanship, okay? And this goes to Lard, this question, basically, maybe he can answer it. So I put I actually wrote it down. So if AGOA is renewed, but Trump keeps tariffs in place, then AGOA preferences can be undermined. The administration can, however, lay tariffs over AGOA preferences. Isn't that so? Yeah? By declaring national security or reciprocity grounds. This is what turns AGOA into a site of brinkmanship. Okay? So in the same vein, if Congress renews AGOA in its current form, but the administration maintains broad tariffs, does this not create a structural contradiction? So where do we fit into that? Because we have these two things. We have an executive order and we have a legislative order. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so the technical answer is that the legislative should be the one that is most authoritative. I have not heard Steve's argument for why this could be done or renewed as an executive order. However, the general theology is that you should set tariffs, that only Congress has the power technically to set general tariffs. Congress has delegated power to the president under certain legislation for certain conditions to impose tariff in certain emergency cases or against, as a specific commercial remedy against a particular exporter, in a particular country, et cetera. And so there are various processes for this. I think, as all of you are aware, the entire process of the bilateral tariffs is under court challenge. The best analysis I've heard is there may be an initial decision by the end of September, but whatever that is will almost guaranteed go to the Supreme Court. And so this will take until Christmas or longer, to get an answer for legally what's the answer. The preferred solution, I would suggest to you, is to have the clarity through a legislative mechanism, ideally through something like renewal of AGOA or some other trade legislation, that would then, it would not face any legal challenges because whatever Congress passes, they are constitutionally the entity that's supposed to do this. Technically, the point is every country has MFN unless there's something else. And so if it's a GOA or a successor to a GOA, then that's the baseline. And so then if you have a specific tariff that's on top of, because of Section 232 or some bilateral mechanism, whatever it is, then that gets added onto the base. And so if a GOA has made your base 0, then it's in this case 0 plus 10 or 0 plus 15. And so at least you would have theoretically some predictability. This is a little bit of what I was trying to get at with, I think the business community would want that spelled out, ideally in legislation. That, so if Congress says this is our understanding, we authorize the president to issue, for Africa or for the globe, certain global tariffs, that again would close that legal or authoritative group. But the simple plain English point is I recognize that MFN, which, so the point is if MFN is now suddenly all over the map and in many cases very high, plus a variable depending on the day of the week bilateral tariff, that many of your companies, many of your exporters will sit there and say that the total number is too high or it's too uncertain.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Excellencies. Thank you, colleagues. We had a fruitful session, and with that, allow me to close this session, and let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Let's break for coffee.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, let's take a 15 minutes break and then we'll head to the second session. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Thanks for taking the time until the last session. This session will be a presentation of a report on advancing U.S.-Africa trade and investment relations by Dr. Joel Nshiso, and another paper which is on proposed engagement strategy and diplomatic advocacy for the African Diplomatic Corps and the AU mission. And I want to seize this opportunity to pay tribute to my former ambassador, Ambassador Hilda Suka-Mafuzi, who has been instrumental. So as these two papers are done, following the meetings that she has with a number of ambassadors to provide another perspective that can be useful in our advocacy strategy. These are the views and opinion of their authors, but in our opinion, they will enrich the discussion and the way we frame our issues. Without further ado, I want to give the floor to Dr. Joel to make his presentation. Our objective is to finish by 1 o'clock before we go to lunch. Thank you very much, Dr. Joel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarek, for trusting us and accepting our report on advancing U.S.-Africa trade investment relations. I am Ngoy Joel Nshiso. I am a professor here in the United States of international business at Liberty University. I also serve as a consultant and advisor to the foreign trade minister in Congo DRC. And my thesis was on AGOA. And this gives me a little bit understanding of everything we are sharing here and trying to put them in the perspective of the science. Our study was focused on data. How you can use statistics during your negotiation to make your case. And we're going to share with you some of those statistics here. Let me make this statement before I start. whether AGOA is renewed or not, you still need strong arguments to convince during your negotiation with the United States government. If AGOA is not renewed, it may be incarnated in something else. And even for that, you still need a strong based number information to make your case. Let me put this in a strategic context. AGOA renewal in 2025 already showed that we have opportunities, but we also have a risk of losing it. So we need African ambassadors and African countries to play on both. What are the opportunities and what are the risks you have to renew AGOA? US-Africa trade in 2024 reached 71 billion. When I discuss with some US personalities, they say, it's just 1%. I agree, it's 1%. And as I was speaking with people at the State Department, I tell them, take a coin, right? In one side, you have effigy, image. You may not like that image. In the other side, you have the value, the dollar value. If you don't like the image you see, but the dollar value can buy you something. Yes, it is 1%. Nobody likes it. We would like to have more. But look, that 1% in 2024 went to 71 billion of exchange. This is changing people's life, not only in the US, but also in Africa. So because of this power of the trade, we see years after year, Africa need or must negotiate from a position of strength for reciprocal benefits. At some point, we go as weak when we negotiate. But we need to go beyond that stage. We will see why we have to negotiate on the position of strength. It's because of what Africa can offer. We have some challenges we are facing in this negotiation. AGOA renewal uncertainty is threatening Africa's preferential market access. It becomes more and more difficult to access American market if the tariff and the barriers we see continue to exist. Non-tariff barriers have blocked about 20% of Africa agricultural export. Just non-tariff barrier blocks 20%. And if a negotiation is on those non-tariff barriers, we can open up US-Africa trade to another level, an acceptable level. If we go to the negotiation as different countries, that will weaken African bargaining power. We would advise African Union to put all African countries together and speak one voice using information, data we have during those negotiations. You know that when the tariff started, the American administration wanted to negotiate with country by country, and you have to sign a confidentiality engagement. But you see that European Union said yes, country by country, but also has a single market. Africa can use the same procedure where country, if they want to negotiate themselves, they can, but at the end of the day, speak one voice. The competition between the US with other major economies have been heightening the US demand for Africa critical minerals. What are the opportunities we have for Africa? Let's push for AGOA 2.0 if the existing one was 1.0. And in this push, let's go beyond the traditional product and add services, digital trade, and investment, because this touches to the demand of US businesses. African countries need to do strategic mineral diplomacy by demanding value addition and technical transfer. Not all African countries produce mineral, but for the US need today, as we are one continent with a single voice, the strategic mineral can be used as a leverage for all African countries by those who produce mineral and sell them. Why? Because once we win on that side, that negotiation and conclusion will have ripple effects on other countries who does not produce mineral. Because as you know, one industry gives birth to another one, and so forth. We need to work on joint venture for electric vehicle batteries, information communication technology, agribusiness, healthcare, and green energy. These are the trend of the American business right now. As we touch to those points, we have a voice, we have a place, and we have a negotiation to do. Africa needs to leverage dominance on some products, some as cocoa. We have Ghana here and Cote d'Ivoire. So only those countries, they supply 70% of the world need cocoa. And US is in big need of that. Vanilla with my ambassador here from Madagascar. The only one country to produce that product in big quantity and serve quite well the American market. We need also to work on shear better and gum Arabic export because they are needed in the American industry. What can be the strategy to use for the mineral power? I mean, there I'm presenting you a table as I spoke before. You see in that graph that Africa supply 70% of cobalt through DRC. And I see my friend from DRC back there. This is a power not only for DRC, but for all African countries to use that as a leverage. Manganese, 48%, lithium, 9%. The other product that's metal, forgot the explanation in English, 40%. What does US economy gain from Africa? US exported to Africa 18.2 billion in 2023. And again, this number is important because when you go in this number, you compare to what Africa exported to US, Africa exported more. So as we deal with tariff, it's about balancing the trade balance, right? So who have gained more in this? And who lost? Africa lost because he received less product from the United States, and the US economy gained more from Africa export. Each 1 billion in export supports 7,000 jobs in America. $7,000. Think about when happened the layoffs. If they simply say that the US economy laid off 3,000 people, you understand how things will be unbalanced. But Africa, through export, through AGOA, is supporting for what each 1 billion, 7,000 jobs. AGOA import reduces US consumer price by up to 20%. You live here in America, you have a purchasing power. But you see here that Africa is helping you to save money up to 20% across the board. Those are arguments we can use because they are statistic based. They are not created. To get to these numbers, we took all the database possible, compiled them together through statistic method, and came to this number. US firms like Tesla, Apple, Hershey's, and Google, they depend on African inputs. If Africa supply less cobalt just for a few times, electric vehicle in US, whether they will not be produced in big quantity or companies may stop and lay off people. What products are driving US industry? The problem with AGOA, Mr. Tarek, until now have been, let's bring everything we have in Africa and sell in America. Then you will talk about nuts, you will talk about cassava leaves. They have no impact. International trade, it's about competitive advantage. Let's focus on the competitive advantage first and open up the market for other things instead of looking for an AGOA, everything for everybody. That may not work because that's where we are trapped. When a countries like Nigeria come to negotiate about cassava roots, they may say, but what is the impact in America? So you're blocking already yourself. But if you take the product that are driving the US industry, you have the chance to mark your point in the negotiation. We say it again, cocoa 70% of global supply. And this import brings 2.3 billion every year. Vanilla, 80% from Madagascar. This product by itself, 400 million every year. Shea butter in Africa supports 16 million African women. If US is about empowering women, this is a tool. If US have disbanded USAID, this is the tool to help those who are left without economic means to continue to strive. Gun Arabica is important for US beverage, cosmetic, and pharmaceutical industry. What are some recommendations we push for African Union? Our recommendations are: advocate for AGOA reauthorization with expanded scope on those products that drive the U.S. industry. Establish African Union Critical Mineral Task Force in Washington, D.C. You are following the debate about the deal between Congo DRC and United States. How about putting in those negotiations also other countries like South Africa, Zambia, and speak one voice? And this is only African Union who can recommend that, support it and push for it. And to do so, I think you need to have a task force here working on that. And if you need some contribution, we can help you starting that task force where you will ask individual countries to have input and bring them to the Capitol Hill or White House or USTR as a team speaking one voice. Launch a US-Africa joint venture roundtable. AGOA have numerous times talk about investment. And in my discussion with some experts, I always say, show me that investment you made in Africa. Precisely. And it will bring number like, oh, USAID did this, but did they do it for AGOA? Or now you're bringing it to AGOA? Show me what was an occasion where we had all Africans, Chamber of Commerce and businesses sitting together to meet US counterparts and discuss joint venture. So we can push on this as we need negotiation for new AGOA. As I said before, if AGOA does not have the chance to be renewed, any other program still need this kind of recommendation to give Africa voice. Form a buyer supply task force for strategic commodities. Let's focus on what is strategic for Africa and establish task forces to give more information, more insight, more studies. Until now, the weakness we have in Africa is those who are buying are the ones making the studies. So they choose and pick what they want. But if we make those studies as a continent, we can defend them and be convincing. Commission a continental African Union-US trade impact study. Whether we keep AGOA, whether it is renewed, or there is another program, we need a joint commission to always present the impact of that program from that voice of two partners sitting at the same table. What are the next steps we need to take? Convene a EU ambassador roundtable in Washington. Probably we don't have time anymore because September is not far. But you know, politics can decide in a split of a second. Say, we need you here. I don't think that African ambassadors who are here will refuse to sit at the table and start harming strategies. Engage with US agencies like USTR, TFC, Exim Bank, US TDA, Commerce Department in proactively way. And again, not as a country, but as a group of countries. We know that maybe it is difficult to go and discuss with the White House about the tariff because he set the rule. But it is not the case for USTR and DFC. We can. Probably you did it, I don't know. They did it. And now, if you did it, let's continue. Because of the situation on the ground now. Leverage US funding institution for business-to-business matchmaking and investment facilitation. Develop AGOA mutual impact dashboard showcasing mutual benefits. I told you at the beginning that data for AGOA are segregated. They are not in one place, which makes it difficult to use them and convince the other. But if we have a dashboard, we can use that for our benefit in the negotiation. Well, it was about data provided to you, but why for? If there is not action. So here is the call for action. Africa needs to negotiate as one to secure reciprocity, co-investment, and sustainable prosperity. We do it already. We can do it again and again, maybe with different strategies, just to make our voice across the table. Have a unified African Union strategy will strengthen Africa leverage in Washington and beyond. The study was prepared by my mentor, Stephen Landy, and I simply helped him to put the number together. Thank you, Mr. Tarek.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Joel. You have been so modest and humble. I think you made a huge contribution, and definitely the leadership and the experience and the vision of our unique and own Mr. Steve Landy. Your presentation has brought a number of important ideas, I think, that can be very valuable. As you know, this is an exercise of reflection, of seeking new innovative ideas on a number of areas, and how we operate at the level of our ambassadors, that these recommendations, what will come from these 2 days workshop will be conveyed to our capitals, to the African Union Commission, and will feed, in my opinion, the discussion that will take place at the level of our senior official and Minister of Trade. And many of the ideas that you have presented are, in my opinion, deserve close attention and examination. And thank you for sharing your experience, your knowledge, and your wisdom on AGOA. We are glad to have you on this exercise. Now it's my privilege and pleasure to give the floor to, in my modest opinion, one of the most knowledgeable experts on trade issue, and particularly in AGOA, but also one who thinks outside the box. And you will see the kind of ideas and suggestions that he brought to the table. In my opinion, they are also worth our examination and close attention. Mr. Steve, the floor is yours.
Is it better now? A comment was made that I was married 60 years, and I got more applause than anything else that was said for that. So since then, my wife has amazed me and everyone else, and she wrote a book. So I promised I'd bring her book, show it to you all. $20, nice book. It's on Loehmann's, which is a department store that was famous in New York for cut rate prices, which would be normal and so on. Has some possibilities for Africa. And if anybody would like a book by Stephen Landy's wife, I brought copies. Now that I have fulfilled my family responsibilities. By the way, it's a good book. Let me move into AGOA. Okay, let me move into the reason I'm here. First, I want to congratulate the ambassadors. No one has written this in the newspaper, But to me, one of the most amazing accomplishments took place about 3 weeks ago. You may all recall that when the administration came out on April 2nd, the famous White House Garden, Rose Garden speech about saving the United States, the U.S. Renaissance with the duties, they only suggested that the highest duties in the world go against Lesotho, 50%. Third highest, excuse me, I have a little cold here. The second highest against, the third highest against Madagascar, 47%. I think the eighth and ninth highest against Mauritius, 40%. The U.S. then came up with something which I never heard of in my 60 years of trade negotiations called the non-disclosure agreement. So they kind of said to the countries, well, you're kind of on your own here. You can't talk to other people. You can't talk to the press. You have to talk to us, which has some advantages, I guess. Well, somehow, when the announcement came just before they imposed the duties, all the duties were down to 15%. So I want to congratulate whoever carried out the negotiations. I don't know because it was at the non-disclosure agreement, but that was quite an amazing accomplishment and so on, because it was taken the second, or they will say the garment exports, which next to South Africa are the most important exports, which were threatened, and getting them down to 15% is still a challenge, 10% for Kenya, but it doesn't have the same threat. So I begin first with the congratulations to whom I don't know who it's going to, because with the non-confidential agreements off, I can thank the people, but whoever they were, they did a very good job. Let me also respond to the question. I always say there's a difference between trade experts, people like myself who really know nothing other than trade, and smart people who know everything else, but maybe an expert. But let me respond to the excellent question from the ambassador from Swatini about these relationship between the duties that are very confusing. U.S. has MFN duties. As you know what AGOA did, if you look in the tariff book, you'll see MFN duty 15%, 20%. A little asterisk, or I don't know what it was, it's a D or an A, there's some letter there, AGOA duty-free. That's why you get duty-free imports. On top of that, the U.S. the U.S. trade law provided saying that in case of special situations, unfair trade practices like dumping, subsidization, and so on, general unfair trade practices, unreasonable practice called Section 301, the president has a right to impose a duty independent of the MFN duty. So they had like two separate duty rates on the same item. One is your MFN duty rate, which is 0, and second are the supplementary duties. This administration pulled out something, what was it again? The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. Was it 1977? I'm not sure the year. And so on. They pulled it out and they said, no. This is our act. It's different than Section 301, different than subsidies, but we feel there's an immediate threat to the hollowing out of the United States because of large trade deficits the U.S. is running. So they simply took this particular rule and they said, as with Section 301, it goes above the MFN duties, and we're going to slap duties. And based on that, they came up with a formula where they looked at your imports, they looked at your imports from the United States as well as your exports to the U.S. As everybody uses the example, they didn't take into account that maybe vanilla beans didn't threaten anybody except made you smell nicer, which I thought was nice, and that maybe is a little less damaging to the U.S. than somebody importing a semiconductor or something. But they just lumped everything together, came up with a formula, and out of that came our famous 50, 47, and 40% tripartite. And based on that measurement, which no economist could defend, but it was a simple one, it worked. And so when President Trump had his speech and had his little table, you guys sat there and got that duty down. But that's what that's about. The MFN duty is the same. The AGOA duty, free, is the same. And the only difference is you are subject to a surcharge of 15% if you happen to have had a large trade deficit by this formula which I described. And if you didn't have a deficit at all, you had a small deficit, you had a 10% duty, a flat 10%. And what they did is for all of Africa, with three basic exceptions, they said all the African countries have applied to 10% if they don't have a deficit with us, or 15% if they're in the high deficit category, which is quite an accomplishment. The importance of that particular duty rate is not the fact it's 10 or 15%. People miss that. What is important in terms of the duty rate is the preference it gives you over other suppliers. You are not generally competing against U.S. producers. Those are in your people. So the 10%, 15% gives them an advantage over you. Who you are competing about in general is the Far East. 6 countries you chose, I'm not going to Cambodia, India, China, Indonesia. I could think of the 6th one if I think a few moments and so on. But there's 6 of them. All of them are subject to a reciprocal duty of 20%. So that means that if you're one of the 3 countries that are down to 15, you have a 5% preference. And if you're one of the countries that are down to 10, Kenya particularly, you have a 10% preference. That is the meaning of that, is not the fact that somebody's paying money on your import, because they pay that. I mean, maybe they want to pay 10% more, but vanilla beans has an inelastic supply. I mean, you don't lose much sale if it's 10% cheaper, more expensive. So that's the story on the duties. What my message that I'm delivering, or message 1, I would say, is that I want you to be treated like the USMCA, the United States Mexican Canadian Agreement imports. They call it USMCA compliant imports that meet that requirement. Because guess what USMCA pays? USMCA compliant imports. Do they pay 10%? No. Do they pay 5%? No. Guess what reciprocal duty they pay? 0. Goose eggs. 0. So if we could, and this is where I'm coming from, if I think the major attention of the Africans over the next 1 month, because we're focusing on an AGOA deadline, independent of AGOA, not AGOA, but if we focus on getting the 10 and 15% reciprocal duties down to 0, and all this involves is 1 line, maybe 4 words in the executive order. Oh God, 12475, I think. But the numbers he defined, but the executive order that they issued, which increased all these duties and so on, etc. 1 line that says, and AGOA. So it's USMCA and AGOA are exempt. Should USMCA be exempted? I don't know, but they have an agreement. Should AGOA be exempted? Yes, there's no question of doubt. Are you a cause of the U.S. problem? Are you the reason the U.S. is getting industrialized, hollowed out because of imports of vanilla beans, because of sewed-up garments? I don't think so. I certainly don't think you're causing it with your critical minerals you're sending us. You're not part of the problem. Does it make it better for the U.S. to slam these duties on you? I don't think so. If anything, it makes things more expensive that people buy. It makes us less competitive and so on. So I think there's a very strong argument. So the message I begin with usually say, okay, when we're looking at what matters, and why does it matter? Well, in garments, it's important, the AGOA benefits. That's why it works. Because the MFN duty on garments are high. The average duty on U.S. dutiable imports are 3.3%. The duties on cotton textiles are, say, 16%, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on the product. The duty on synthetic textiles made of man-made fiber is 32%. That's why most of your exports now that are coming to the United States and the clothing, it's a synthetic fabric. If you then start and you say, okay, I'm now going to get a 20% advantage over, okay. So the first thing you get is, so you have AGOA duty-free. So instead of paying 3.3% on most of your imports, you pay 0. Unfortunately, that's not earth-shaking. That doesn't get you trade. On the 2 other ones, the textile items, they're very significant because it gives you 16% and 32%. If on top of that now, you're not paying a reciprocal duty, and it turns out that all the key countries in the Far East are paying at least 19 or 20%, I say 20 for round figure and so on, etc., that gives you 20 and 32. That's 52% advantage. Quite amazing. I don't think we're going to be reducing duties soon in the U.S. Maybe Mr. maybe Mr. Lear-Trevor's idea of getting these duties codified would work. I don't think that would happen, but it's an idea, and so on. So that's your advantage. But for everything other than textiles, you don't have that advantage unless you get the exemption, because 3.3% isn't enough. But if you then say all the other countries are paying 20% duties, you have a rate of 23.3%. That's a meaningful preference, and so on. And then there's some items that are higher, and you can move up and down. So to me, the message I'm delivering is a hard message. I'm not sure it's deliverable, but it's the message I would deliver, and so on. I would work as an African group. How you would do it, African Diplomatic Corps is well known. I mean, Tony explained 100% correct that we owe a go to the African Diplomatic Corps. We owe its renewal to the African Diplomatic Corps, and so on, etc. Once you get together, coordinated by Perm Rep as appropriate, and so on, etc. But that, to me, is the thing on the ground that moves quickly. How you bring ministers in, how you bring in the African Union in, I don't know. How you deal with this non-disclosure agreement that you can't talk to anyone about a specific negotiation. It's your Hazarai. I don't have a solution yet. Those are sitting there. But I do know you can talk in principles. That much I do know. So what I have been suggesting is that come as early as possible, September, and so on. We've got a couple of days in August. Somewhere, don't know where, maybe from Joel's think tank, I'm not sure. But it comes out, and we simply put on the thing that Africa is willing to make some offers. I'm going to get to that in a minute. It's going to get some offers. In exchange, it would like three things. One, extension of AGOA. I have been one of the people argue for the short-term extension because I don't think we get anything longer if we try to push anything more complicated. If we try to push something more complicated, we'll end up with a Chinese amendment or something bad in there, amendment against a particular country. I think if we can get a 1 or 2 year extension and then work on improving different view, and he may be correct, one doesn't know, and so on. I would say that to me would be what I want, that you push for a 1 or 2 year extension, still under the Trump administration. Second thing is you ask them to put that little line in the executive order, which has to be done at the highest level, has to be well planned, has to get to Peter Navarro, who's in charge of, who's the economic zine or the trade czar, has to get, of course, to Jameson Greer, who you're in contact with USTR. They have put the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, basically in charge. So those are your three key players. You got to get this message to them, to the president, and so on. Now, how do you sell the president? Well, this is creativity. This is why I'm here talking to you. This is why you guys came out in the last week in August, the deadest month of the thing. I said, Tarek, well, we have more than 5 people. We could probably meet up in your little office up there. And we end up with a full room. I mean, I give him compliment. I mean, I give you compliment. You're here, and so on, etc. My wife wanted to know why I was going to work today. I said, I have a few people I have to meet with. Off I went, and so on. Took a book, but off I went, and so on, etc. So what I'm saying basically is that this is a key group, and if we put something out and we get it in the newspaper, get it on Fox News, CNBC, African requests are here. Now, how do you make it interesting? Well, put an end to the lie, and it's a lie that AGOA is non-reciprocal. Where did that ever come up with? If you're sitting there with Uganda talking about gender rights, I don't think it's non-reciprocal. The U.S. is in the room. If you're sitting talking about poultry restrictions, I don't think that's exactly non-reciprocal. They're talking the same language in poultry as I talked about in the 1970s with the Europeans and so on, etc. About how do you value legs, and somehow we're not dumping our drumsticks because we eat wings in the U.S. Now we eat drumsticks too, and all these technical issues. That's reciprocal. Now it's really reciprocal, but in a different room, because the U.S. is now saying we want something back, and countries are running around. Again, I don't know what the offers are, but they're very creative. Tony Carroll observed that today, and I tend to agree. You're talking about purchase equipment, purchase commitments from the U.S. You're talking about tariffs. I would put 3 things on the table for the U.S. I would aim that at the White House. Mr. Trump, we've listened. The Europeans, you went to the Europeans, you said we're slapping a 15% duty. Europe didn't retaliate. That never happened before in the history of trade. I mean, I ever heard of Europe saying you can put a 15, but Trump got away with it. And he talks to them and so on, etc. Mexico, they got ahead of him, did a beautiful job. They worked there and so on. Countries that didn't talk to him, India, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but they're paying now a 50% duty. Brazil, because again, I don't want to get in trouble, so I won't go in detail, is paying a 50% duty. So many countries have talked to the U.S. under some very strange conditions. I'm arguing, I'm not telling Africa what to do. You should join the country. You shouldn't have to be more powerful than Europe. I mean, and so, but that's, again, has to be your choice. But if you accept the U.S. wording, you can do three things for the U.S. that would be very positive. Number one, critical minerals. Yes, let us sit there, discuss critical minerals. There are many ideas around. We have one here that we've developed with Tony Carroll, which focuses on setting up reserve pools, reserves in African countries. So that helps them against low prices, because China sometimes dumps their merchandise to get the prices down, to get people out and so on. Also enables them to have an opportunity for processing. So that's the one thing that we would like, in addition to the many discussions. But the whole idea is, you say we're willing to discuss access to critical minerals. That gets you attention. The second thing is, which has never been acceptable to me, and I've been yelling about it for many years, has been, why do you give preferences in your market for Europe and not for the U.S.? We give you duty-free preferences. The Europeans have something by that horrible name, partnership agreements. It's a new definition of partnership. I don't know where it came from. If you don't sign, we're going to put duties on you. That's not a partnership agreement. Nigeria is not part of the partnership agreement, so they're paying a high duty now and so on. So I don't know why they call it partnership agreements, but they call it that and so on. But if you offer the U.S. the same treatment as you offer Europe under these, quote, EPAs, I think that would be something that get headlines, gets a hell of a lot of tensions, and puts you into the right relationship with them and so on. And I think three, and it's hard, one of the U.S. requests are for greater alignment on national security and economic matters. Now, that's a hard one. That's in their executive order. It's a hard one to deal with. And what I was thinking about, I'm told that President Trump, whenever he meets with somebody, he says, can I look at your UN voting record? And he looks at the he says, oh, why are we giving all these money to these people? They're voting for Cuba, whatever. Again, I don't know how President Trump speaks. I do know how he speaks, but I hear about it, but I don't know what he thinks. But he's always talking about UN voting records. Well, to me, UN voting records are non-important issues, are the most unimportant things in the world. I could care less whether the vote in the UN is 97-2 in favor of Cuba or 87-6 in favor of Cuba. So what I would say would be, if I was sitting there, one idea, there's many other ideas for foreign policy people, say, okay, let's set up a really detailed consultation mechanism. We're going to raise our issues as well with you guys, but go a little bit in his direction since he has it in there. So what I'm saying is, come on the table and say, yes, we know your basic requests and we are willing to address them. The non-reciprocity, the discrimination doesn't harm me, but I'm already giving the preference to Europe and so on. Most of my imports don't come from Europe, from the U.S. anyway. It's not a big revenue loss. Okay, we'll give that to you. Critical minerals, yeah, we're already talking to you about it in 19 different forms. We'll put that on the table. How you want to deal with the foreign policy issue, let me shut up because that's way beyond me. I'm just saying there's a way to deal with it that you shouldn't just simply say no and so on, which doesn't involve pulling out. The U.S. talks to BRIC member India, well, you should talk to BRIC member India, hopefully we talk again, but doesn't talk to BRIC member China. So there's a difference in how we deal with countries. So I think that's doable. Mr. Waltz, the new UN secretary, the new U.S. representative to the United Nations, is very interested in this particular area, working with Africans. So that's why I highlight it, because he still might have contact. So the way I picture it, in my very simple, it's my simplistic mind, is that we focus with something that comes out early September, gets attention, talks about reciprocal duties, say you want to talk about them separately, fine, but for us, they all go together. You can't talk about a GOA renewal, and this again is the question. Even though you could say they're different duties, the effects are the same. It comes out of somebody's pocket, and they pay the money. It's the same. And it happens that the reciprocal duties affect the non-textile trade, and the other one doesn't. So basic position is, You lay that out as one of your requests, like I was saying. I would add one thing to it very quickly. The reason why garment is such a success is for two reasons. One is the high duty, but two is the origin rule. Because what it says is that an acceptable way to get into, I'm looking at my friend Landry because he's kind of my education person on this one, and so on, etc. But anyway, the way that you get into the scale is either by infant industry and you try to start an industry from the beginning, protected. It has a lot of critics to it and so on. Nigeria tries it. I'm not going to. Or you begin assembling little operations, and then you go backwards or forwards in the supply network, and so on. So assembly. The reason it works is because for clothing, they say the only thing we require of Africa is they add labor. Well, that's what you do when you make clothing. You add labor. For everything else, they also require materials, at least 35%, and so on. That's a hard number to hit. So I have always said the one thing you should address is the question of assembly outside of textiles. You can put limits to prevent abuses. They're always saying, well, China's going to sneak in the products. India is going to sneak in the products. There are trade mechanisms you can put in to prevent that. You could, for example, count it. If India is sending a component incorporated in African product, you could say, India, we're going to view this as an export from India, so we want some compensation for it. Let us ship you more blueberries. You know, trade negotiators can do whatever you want. So you can work something out where you recognize them, they still enter duty-free, and you pay some kind of a concession. As a trade negotiator, come into my room, I'll be happy to give you 10 different ways you deal with that. But I would say that the four major changes would then, of course, be one, renew AGOA. Two, of course, would be the get rid of the 10% reciprocal. Agree in a new renewal that you're going to have a 2-year schedule or 1-year schedule, not just by trade alone, by a bunch of committees in Congress. So you'll look at all the other issues, what I always call the Whitaker issues, because she's the one who raised them, and we all go in many ways to Rosa Whitaker, but that you include things like investment assistance and so on. I'm not sure how much technical training, a lot of things that my friend Joel laid out and so on. You include that in there, get other committees involved and so on. And then you get the 3 real changes you need for AGOA, as far as I could see. For one, get rid of conditionality. There's a lot of support for getting rid of conditionality by Republicans. Republicans don't want the conditioning on human rights. They don't want the conditioning on elections and so on, etc. They're against that too. So you come together. If it's the same Congress which is Republican dominated, you see how much power Mr. Trump has and so on, etc. That actually makes it easier to pass AGOA. So you see what you can do. You use the smaller ones to review every 3 years. And I'm not against that, but the real one is you just reduce the conditionality in the basic program and so on, etc. 3, you get some kind of parallel membership with AFCFTA. I don't have time to go into the advantages, but it's obvious it doesn't mean that countries like Algeria or Egypt have to become full members, but there's ways they can affiliate with the agreement and so on, etc. And I'm sure there's 2 or 3 other ones we can put on the table. Some of them are on the paper we did and so on. But there's a whole group there. So you have an agreement that you're going to look at AGOA renewal within a given period of time, but more than just simple, what do I do? You add some trade provisions, and you also add some support agreements, whether it be investment or whatever you want there, and a big private sector. Let people who say that somehow you can renew AGOA for a long period of time without changing it is living in a dream world. Mr. Trump is very clear that he doesn't want that kind of an agreement. We can argue it's non-reciprocal, but unless you make it non-reciprocal, it ain't going to pass Congress. So my argument is, I'd love to renew it. I wouldn't particularly, but you could renew it for 10 years, but you won't, and so on. So in conclusion, I would say that we laid out what we were told to do by our good friend Tarek, who is not responsible for our conclusions, however, and by the ambassador, who was nice enough to ask us to do some work for her, which we really appreciate and so on, is that here's in a proposal that we like, puts Africa in the forefront. You get there, get help from outside, public relations, bad word, but people begin talking to Africa as you should talk about it, a region important, because the bottom line, and forget all the other arguments, and my last sentence is, where is the growth in U.S. exports going to be over the next 10, 15 years? It's going to be in poorer countries that move up the level, that become middle income and move up. 1/4 of the population is from Africa. We know the facts. So we don't sell it as something immediate, but we say, this is where your interest is. So let me conclude on that basis, and thank you all for showing up in August and listening to me talk a little bit and being late for lunch, which is really a sacrifice. So we thank you much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Landy, for an excellent presentation, a lot of food for thought and the new ideas, as I said, which in my opinion, they complement the first panel that we have today and will provide us with another perspective, very rich one. So without further ado, I want to give the floor to their excellencies, colleagues. If you have any remarks, any issue, observation that you want to address to Dr. Joel and Mr. Landy. So the floor is open. Yes, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
For very enlightening presentations from Dr. Joel and Stephen. My question will be directed to Dr. Joel, and it relates to the issue of negotiating as a bloc. I fully agree with you on that, and the importance of that cannot be overemphasized. And if I may disclose that, I think generally Africa has tried that, at least maybe at regional level. I would give you an example of SACU. We tried that. You may see that I sit next to my SACU partners here. We tried that, and there was serious pushback. The administration was clear that no, that's a no-go area, and that was deliberate, it was very deliberate on the part of the administration to divide us and tried us to get us to negotiate at the level where we are weaker when we come as individual countries. So I'm not sure how we may approach the issue again, because it's very important. I agree with you. If you take the SACU only, the tariffs that have been imposed upon individual members, they have a direct bearing on the future and sustainability and the founding principles of SACU. They shake everything fundamental that defines SACU as a customs bloc. So I don't know how we can re-strategize around that, like EU, as you mentioned, that to emphasize that we can't engage in any further discussions unless we are accommodated as a regional bloc. It can be SADC or Edwin at SACU, or as an African Union. I don't know, how far we would want to broaden the grouping. So I would like to have your views on that. Yeah, for now, I think that would be my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Any other questions? We can take 2 or 3 questions before we close. Yeah, Zimbabwe. Sister, over to you.
Thank you, Shajer. I join others in thanking the panelists for the discussions and what their presentations. Mine really is on the issue of the non-disclosure agreement. This is something new that I personally am not aware of as an issue that comes in negotiations between bilateral countries. And I'm just wondering, from the expertise of the presenters, do they have a copy, maybe an unsigned one for that matter, that we can look at, learn from, and probably look for legal advice in case some of our countries are asked to sign such a thing, or even just your thoughts on how we should navigate these non-disclosure agreements? Is this something that we can negotiate before signing, or it's a copy that's presented to countries and just expected to sign? Thank you.
Okay, South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have two comments. First is for Dr. Jewel. He recommended that the AU considers establishing a critical minerals task force here in Washington, D.C. to be the body that will negotiate for Africa's strategy around critical minerals. My issue was in terms of the recommendation is sound, but in terms of the likelihood of it happening, because I do recall previous ADC meetings, even under the Biden administration, were recommended for capacity infusion into this mission, particularly around AGOA negotiation. Even the previous Ambassador Boshanga was here and had our recommendation, and nothing has never been done on that. But I know at this level, there is a critical mineral policy being established. Perhaps what we would need for now is to just, so that we're all on the same page, if that document can be shared as we negotiate bilaterally. In terms of Stephen Landy and his recommendation, particularly for a joint, a collective approach to the White House around the inclusion into the executive order of AGOA, I don't know how feasible is that, because for us as South Africa and the White House, we have a very contentious political issues that might overtake such an approach. And we as South Africans have continued to advocate for the renewal of AGOA with the retention of South Africa. Unfortunately, whenever we're in those spaces, that the bilateral South Africa issues tend to overtake the negotiations. So that's the delicate balance that we're working as South Africa, but we still recommend for the overall extension of AGOA with our retention, understanding that we have very sharp differences on political issues with the US. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joel. Mr. Landy, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for the questions. The first question was how to do the negotiation when we know that door seems to be already closed because of this mandatory non-disclosure document to sign. You know, you are very good at diplomacy, at negotiation, at least at that level. And you also know how to argue in public, or to be very nice in public and contentious in private. Use those tools, because that's why you are in the diplomatic corps. And also they know that you have that tool. Until it is exercised, then you know where is the where is the problem. In our report, if Mr. Tarek disclosed it to you, he did. Very good. Okay, he said he did. We laid out different things, what I call windows, instead of big door open. We are now jumping a little bit late in asking to speak with the White House compared to other countries. Probably you did it in the past, I don't know. But what about going around by the US agencies, USTR, Exim Bank, and others, but with numbers? That's what our study was about, to convince them, or just to ask this simple question. Is US benefiting from this or not? They also have those numbers, and there will be escalation of your meeting with them. I did like what Stephen said, Landy said, publish it in the newspaper. We had meeting, and that started becoming a talking point in Capitol Hill. The other question was related to mineral task force. It may be difficult to do it for now. If we look at the case of South Africa, who have a contentious relations. But let's go back to a meeting just held last month by African mining ministries. I think it was in Addis, where they already established that task force of speaking one voice on mineral. How about making now known to the US that we would like to engage in another round of negotiation, because we have a new body who are approved by the African Union to control this sector. I don't know how it works in diplomacy, but it become already something on the table. Going back, we have AFCFTA. Let's not neglect the importance of this body. That's probably where we need to be all under that umbrella. Why? Because in the past years, US already made it clear that he will support this economic body to work with Africa. I don't know how far they are engaged in the discussion, but the problem is not trying one time and stop. It's reinventing the strategy. Continue knocking at the door. Sometimes, as said the French, show that you are agacé. At this time, with the mineral need in the US, there is no way US is going to shut down, to shut off the door forever, because the need is there and it is real. There is also a perception or an understanding in the US that every time we try to block, another major economy is taking advantage of that. So those are, but I would like to recommend you to read the document, because we have really a lot of numbers and the justification that Africa cannot consider itself not contributing to the American economy. We do, and strongly.
Thank you. Steve, the last word.
I don't want to go to jail, so I'm not going to talk about the non-disclosure agreement. I'm not supposed to know about it. And sometimes people go to jail in this administration if the administration doesn't agree with you, so I won't answer. But from what I understand, it's not been used before. I haven't heard it. Doesn't mean it hasn't been. Maybe I haven't heard because it's a non-disclosure agreement. It's not a threat. It's saying, hey, if you want to negotiate with us, you don't have to negotiate with us. Then you have to disclose this NDA. I don't know the details. Does it allow you to talk to other government officials? Does it allow you to talk to other governments? Do you have special exceptions like they pointed out, maybe for the European Union, so they could discuss? I don't, this is above my head. Maybe later on when you're having more private conversation, you can have it. My own view would be when you're faced with 50% duties or 40% duties, you can't negotiate with the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has signed. With all due respect, your job is to save jobs, not to sign. So I'm not critiquing anybody who signed it or not. Now it's after the fact. Yes, I do believe that African countries should have the right to definitely talk to other African countries and African Union when they get to questions which are under somebody else's jurisdiction. As pointed out with SADC, it's definitely under, I mean, SACU and SADC both, is under their jurisdiction. So they have a need to discuss the issues out. How you deal with that, again, Joel's answer, I think is fine. Let me give some examples where, to me, it's important. There's a certain rule every year. You have the AGOA forum in one country, and then you have one in the U.S. They're supposed to have a AGOA forum in DRC, which was a good representation for Central Africa, which is a good idea. The U.S. first decided for security reasons, which again, I don't question. I mean, one thing you learn in it, you don't question, okay, security reasons. I'm not sure. I go to Kinshasa all the time. I feel safer than I do in New York, but that's my own view and so on, etc. But I don't have the National Guard, however, so maybe when we get the National Guard, I'll feel safe in New York. But all I know is that I go to Kinshasa. But that was the reason they gave, fine. Then they said, oh, but by the way, it might be more effective to have the AGOA forum here because we'll be able to pressure Congress if we're in Congress, and they had that effect back in 2015. So I'm not again out to talk about reason, but I want to remind people there's an agreement to go to have a forum in Kinshasa, and whatever is set up in the future, one should kind of remember it. Another issue, I was talking about the reciprocal duties before, but a very important argument is you can't have a situation if you really want to encourage economic unity if you have a whole group of countries subject to 15% duties when they export to the U.S., and another group of countries subject to 10%, particularly when they're next door to each other. So just a reason why you should argue for the exemption from reciprocity, that's how you solve that particular problem and so on. You just get down to zero. And then, Egypt and Algeria. So I'm saying there's enough reasons that go beyond borders that make this consultation kind of required. I'm happy to have a chance to comment on South Africa because I just didn't want to bring it up, but it's to me. We had a problem years ago, 1974 to be specific, because I remember during the Reagan administration, when we were doing the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, countries on the Caribbean wanted to be part of the process. And we said to them, we can't make you part of the CBI because it's aimed for Central America, aimed for the islands, but we can make you into participants because you're donors. In those days, Venezuela and Mexico used to give oil. They had these petro agreements with these countries, and they would supply them with oil. Colombia was helping them out in market access, if I remember, and so on. So we had a big meeting. We invited them all to the country. In Africa with the Goa, if you want to say who was the biggest donor, is South Africa. I mean, they do the investment. I mean, they're there. So one of the arguments, I can't go into the diplomatic issues, they exist. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed every day we'll get some peace in Gaza, and maybe that will be some openings to make some progress in that particular political issue and so on, etc. It's hard to judge. I always say, as I said earlier, you got BRICS and BRICS. You got India, remember, who until recently had very close relations with the U.S., and you have China as a member, or Russia that doesn't have, Belarus, one of the bad, Belarus, we don't have relationships with. So the fact that people are BRIC members doesn't mean you can't have close relations with the U.S., you just work with them and so on. So my diplomacy, knowing South Africans, Rubio's in stake now, maybe we'll work something out, maybe review South Africa also as a donor in the same way, and maybe that makes it a little bit easier to deal with some of the issues. I think the trade people have done their usual good job as far as dealing with those particular issues and so on. But I do think, and this is what Tony Carroll say, and I just kind of repeat what he says and so on, is that there's a reason for Africa to say, we want to be treated like a unity because it makes us stronger. And that's why we're not going to tell you what to do with South Africa. It's not our business, but it would make us happy. It would make you happy, more effective if we have Africa as a unity. So these conditionalities, please, there are so many other sanctions you have. You can freeze people's assets. You can suspend arms limits. The worst, most ineffective sanction you have, of course, is trade, because you're harming the very people you want to help, the middle class. So I think you can make a strong argument, sanctions and so on. I mean, how do I put it? From a development point of view, I've always thought that if Zimbabwe had been designated, that could have been Ethiopia, because it had so many things going for it. Whether it would have been able to have, I don't know, but it would have been a great opportunity, which unfortunately we lost. We can maybe find again one day. So my basic answer, I think, would be to all those questions that are on the table, that is all can be negotiated. Try to get a unified African position to the extent you can. If you have to leave detailed negotiations to countries, be my guest. But I really think you should try to get an African presence. You got 1 month, September, but there's not many things. Don't accept the difference between this is reciprocal negotiation and this is a AGOA negotiation. It's the same, I mean, again, it's the same negotiation. So to me, if that's the message that I would deliver, would be this particular group. I think we're getting time for my free lunch, but I'm promised a free lunch. And I know that my friend Tarek is going to kick me out if I keep making another joke, so I won't. So I thank you all very much for listening for us, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lindy. Thank you, Dr. Joel. I think a very important question has been raised in the discussion, particularly the Ambassador Mozoto, the issue of African agency and our collective action as a continent, and having a framework on these issues as a continent, and perhaps, as Mr. Lindy said, a room of discussion and maneuver for each member state. So this is, I think, it sends an important message. But our fundamental position is to treat Africa as one, as a continent. And I think we have an opportunity today to bring all African countries, even those who have not being part of AGOA or sanctioned or excluded like Zimbabwe, to treat Africa as a whole continent and underscore the importance of this regional and continental dimension with the US. This is the message, in fact, our leadership is trying to convey, because in itself it allows the US also to leverage that and take advantage from a continent rather than dealing with a separate country. Last remarks, so I want to encourage and highly recommend that you join us tomorrow for the second day, and this one will be very practical. We have gathered experts on advocacy, on framing, on agenda setting, on processes and procedures, how we can articulate and frame our agenda, all these issues in a very compelling argument and task. So this will be, I think, an excellent second day. So I encourage it will be useful to any diplomat to learn from tomorrow's presentation. So I want to reiterate my sincere thanks to all our ambassador who took the time. I know how busy that, but it's highly valuable to us to see you among us. To all our panelists, to colleagues diplomat, to Professor Signé, for your leadership and for bringing always new ideas and perspective how to engage and frame these issues. I mean, each time you innovate, and thank you for that. To Professor Wekesa, thank you, Professor, for your leadership. We will work together on consolidating all these main sessions, as we promised to the ambassadors and the team, by the end of next week in one report with recommendation, which will feed, in my opinion, our capitals, the African unions, on the best way to take this relationship, but also on AGOA advocacy next month. Thank you very much, and bon appetit. You are all invited for lunch. Thank you.
And thank you, Chargé d'Affaires Tarek, for the incredibly amazing first day. So please give him a very warm.
Thank you. It's a team effort. It's a teamwork. Okay, thank you very much. That's very. Oh, we are glad. That's a very good day. This is the mover and shaker.